Today I'm going to tell you a crazy story about the first love between a boy and a girl, a story that, well, keeps escalating. It's one of the most captivating comics I've read recently. So let's dive into this modern world together. The story begins when she was a sophomore in high school, where a girl and her friends gathered to watch a special kind of movie. When she arrived at her friend's house, she had absolutely no idea what kind of film they were about to watch. She was completely clueless about it. The movie the girls picked had such an intense plot that they couldn't hide their surprise while watching. Besides not being able to truly understand what was happening on screen, she found it all a bit strange and unnatural. The only thing she truly remembered, the only thing that struck a chord in her heart, was a simple kiss between the two actors because it looked so beautiful. She liked what she saw so much that she couldn't help but blush and start fantasizing about sharing a kiss with someone special. Startled by her own thoughts, she couldn't help but feel embarrassed and tried to cover her face with her hands. Fast forward a few years, and she's hanging out with her friends in a lingerie store, browsing casually as if it were nothing. Since then, matters between men and women had never sparked her interest or curiosity the way they did for her friends. She thoughtfully eyed the set her friend was holding, which she planned to buy for an upcoming trip with her boyfriend. Her friend insisted it wasn't just any trip, but an overnight one where, something might happen between them. Our protagonist just stared blankly, completely missing the hint. The friend next to her chimed in and then made a very suggestive hand gesture, which finally made her understand. She immediately blushed, letting her friends know she got it, while the friends smugly continued to ramble on about how they had already held hands. The friend slyly mentioned that she had only just noticed his hands were almost the size of her face, so she was really looking forward to what was next. Our protagonist couldn't believe her ears when her friend threw out the theory that hand size is directly related to, Realizing everyone was staring at her because of her over-the-top reaction, she awkwardly looked away. Her friend was surprised, pointing out that even though she didn't go to an all-girls school, she was still very innocent in this department. Their conversation was interrupted when another girl suggested they go on a group blind date. She said her friend was begging her to set him up with someone. Hanul laughed and asked how handsome he was and if he could compare to Jae-hee, the senior. She was immediately shocked. How could you even compare him to one of the most handsome guys on campus? The girl asked in surprise about this other guy who was supposedly as handsome as Jae-hee. She immediately mentioned Kim Minchul from the business school, who was way more popular than Jae-hee. Hanul was surprised to hear the familiar name, but she tried not to show it, listening as her friends described how handsome and aloof he was, just like a celebrity. They left the lingerie store, and she chuckled, mentioning that compared to the neat and kind senior Jae-hee, he seemed like a real problem child. To her surprise, before she could finish her sentence, a guy snuck up and started pinching her cheeks. Hanul asked irritably what he thought he was doing, and he retorted, asking if she thought the sidewalk was her house. The girls behind her were stunned, not expecting her to be able to talk so casually to the handsome guy they were just fawning over. One of the friends was clueless, not knowing they were old friends because she wasn't in the same department and hadn't heard the rumors. These two were childhood friends and had known each other for a long time. That's why Hanul was so surprised that her friend of many years had suddenly become such a hotshot. This campus heartthrob. They had been together for 20 years, since birth. As ridiculously coincidental as it sounds, their moms gave birth at the same time in the same hospital. Their houses also happened to be right next to each other, so their moms kept in touch after giving birth. From then on, they always played together and even went to the same kindergarten. It wasn't just kindergarten. They also went to the same elementary school. There they remained the best of friends all the way through college. They were always bickering and flipping each other off, which was just part of how they interacted, even in high school. When Minchul got handsome and every girl had a crush on him, she still only saw him as a friend. Speaking of fate, right after he dyed his hair, they both ended up at the same university. They were like oil and water, always fighting whenever they were together. Despite their constant bickering, they had one shared hobby that kept them connected. The heavy workload in college was exhausting for Hanul, but what really got her down was the fact that she was still single. Though she understood that with that enforcer always hanging around, she wouldn't approach herself either. Luckily, after they got to college, they spent less time together, which gave her a lot more freedom. That day, when a male classmate asked her out to eat, she stopped and greeted him with a smile. She was just about to agree to check out the new pasta place across the street. Unfortunately for her, that friend of hers happened to appear right behind her. Minchul, looking annoyed and ready to ruin her plans, confronted her about why she wasn't answering his texts. She immediately said he scared her and asked what he wanted. He then suggested they go get some spicy rice cakes. Hanul said she already had plans to have dinner with her classmate and couldn't go tonight. He immediately shot her friend a death glare, asking if she was really going out with that guy. Minchul looked so intimidating that the guy froze in place, trembling with fear. He put so much pressure on him with just a single look that he quickly backed out of his plans and suggested they go another time. Eventually, he caved under Minchul's glare, saying they didn't have to go tonight. The guy ran off so fast she barely saw him go, wishing them a good dinner and a safe trip home. Minchul called him a wimp and then turned to the girl, saying they had to go to the main street. Hanul immediately started hitting him, saying he had no right to cancel her plans or treat her friend like that. He became furious when she said she would never eat with him again and told him to stay a mile away from her. They immediately started arguing about whose fault this whole mess was. In the end, Minchul gave his friend a scornful look and told her she should be the one to disappear. She returned the sentiment, telling him he should disappear and gave him the middle finger with a smile. Just as she wished, he left her alone. Then, a guy she knew quietly approached her. Senior Jae-hee, seeing her startled look, laughed and said her reaction was hilarious. She laughed awkwardly after he asked why she was yelling at thin air in the middle of the street. The girl didn't want to say she had a fight with her friend, so she said they had a really hard assignment that day. Seeing that he knew which assignment she was talking about, she asked and found out he had done it too during his freshman year. She was overjoyed when he said he could give her a USB drive with some good materials he had collected back then. He reminded her that it was at his place and time was short, so she should go with him to get it today. At first, Hanul thought it would be pure bliss, but she had no idea how disappointing it would be. She definitely didn't expect his apartment to be such a disaster zone, with trash everywhere and a complete lack of cleaning. She felt a wave of nausea seeing the mountains of trash, spills, and clutter lying around. Senior Jae-hee, acting as if nothing was wrong, asked why she was standing and told her to sit, but she didn't even know where to step. After what felt like an eternity, the owner of the apartment finally announced excitedly that he had found the damn USB drive. He apologized for making her wait and offered her some juice, but she was too exhausted to even want it. She eventually took the cup, and that's when she noticed how big his hands were. She immediately remembered her friend's words about the theory, which made her blush furiously. He stared at Hanul in confusion, as he couldn't understand why her face had suddenly turned so red. When she nervously laughed and said his hands were really big, he started thinking, which gave him an idea. The guy looked again at her tomato-red face, which only confirmed what he already suspected. Realizing what she might be thinking, he grinned and agreed that his hands were quite big. Then he dramatically held up his hand, pointing out that his ring finger was longer than his index finger. Hanul didn't get what he was implying and felt a wave of panic when she realized his face was getting too close. Not getting the reaction he expected, he started examining his own hand thoughtfully. Then she jumped up, saying she had to go home right away. She grabbed the first USB drive she saw on the table and said her goodbyes. Hanul left him completely confused as she hurried away, trying to figure out why the atmosphere was so weird. Her mind was racing with speculation about what he meant by pointing out his finger length. Figuring her friend would know the real meaning, she barged into his room without a second thought. Imagine her surprise when she walked in on him in a rather indecent position in front of his monitor. She was so stunned by the sight that she couldn't say a word for the first few seconds, just looking him up and down. She tried to compose herself, but she couldn't shake the image of her childhood best friend being caught in that situation. Hanul might have been able to ignore it, but what really freaked her out was that besides the R-rated video, he also had a picture of her open on his screen. Minchul immediately pulled up his pants and tried to stop her, but she bolted, calling him a pervert. He yelled after her, saying he knew what she was thinking, but she was wrong and it wasn't what it looked like. It was true, because he would never use her picture like that, and he definitely would have locked the door. Just 20 minutes earlier, he had come home, still angry about what Hanul had said. He saw a message pop up on his phone from friend, saying he'd found a video he would definitely like. He was skeptical at first, but what he saw on the screen did capture his attention. Minchul was sure he had locked the door, but the lock must have been broken something he definitely didn't know before his friend showed up. Just then, he received a flood of texts from Hanul, so he muted the notifications. He was about to close the chat window, but was surprised to see she had changed her profile picture, wearing clothes that were completely out of character for her. He shook off the thought and got back to what he was doing, something he definitely shouldn't have been doing before being interrupted. After hearing his full explanation, Hanul immediately started stammering that she had to go and didn't want to hear anything. She wanted to get away from him as fast as possible and suggested they talk later. The look of disgust on her face stung Minchul deeply, and he couldn't help but start crying, asking why she wouldn't believe him. When he saw the tears start to fall, she began to stare intently at him, and he realized he had finally lost control. Hanul ran off without a word, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Once outside, she froze in place, trying to process her thoughts after what had just happened. Her emotions were a mess, ranging from disgust to embarrassment to genuinely not understanding why he would cry. A few days later, she was back to her daily routine, pretending nothing had happened, but yesterday's events still lingered in her mind. Minchul hadn't contacted her all weekend, which she completely understood. It was only then that she realized how terrible it must have been to see him cry like that. She hadn't seen him that upset since middle school. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't even see her friend appear beside her. Her friend started grilling her, asking if she was okay since she had been unreachable all weekend and was acting strangely. Hanul didn't want to say it, but she knew she couldn't keep it to herself any longer and needed some advice on what to do. Meanwhile, Kim Minchul was crashing at his friend's place, who was starting to think something was off about him not going home. He gave the guy a look when the owner of the room subtly hinted that it was time for him to leave. He had just said his roommate was barely ever there when his friend snapped back that he could get kicked out of the dorm. Minchul was startled when the guy asked if he was going to see his friend from the English department. To his surprise, the guy immediately started pacing the room before collapsing on the bed, saying he had to check the lock. He kept muttering nonsensical things before saying he should never have given her the door code in the first place. Finally coming to the only logical conclusion that he shouldn't have watched that video, he took care of the person who sent it to him. After making his friend leave, he sat back down on the bed, took out his phone, and stared thoughtfully at the screen. He quickly found Hanul's account in his chat app and started looking at her profile picture. They used to have a picture together, but now her profile picture was a solo shot. Their old photo together made him look thoughtful with a hint of sadness. What really got to him was seeing how genuinely she was smiling in the picture and the disdainful look she gave him at that moment. Meanwhile, the girl decided to carefully share her story, pretending it happened to a friend. Even so, the girl's friend knew Hanul was lying and that it all happened to her, then guessed the boyfriend was Minchul after she mentioned he was almost naked. She got a good scolding from her friend who had wanted to chew her out from the start. Hanul froze when her friend calmly pointed out that she could have just Googled the answer. She was speechless when her friend berated her for not even thinking of that. The girl slumped onto the bench, muttering that none of this would have happened if she had just used her brain. Hanul realized she was the one who had messed up and was mortified with shame. Minji tried to comfort her, saying they could work it out as long as one of them took the first step to reconcile. Hanul perked up and agreed, knowing they needed to break the awkward silence. The girl immediately spotted Kim Minchul walking in the distance and pointed him out, which startled Hanul. She jumped up and said goodbye to her friend, telling her she'd see her at the dorm. Hanul knew she was running away, even though he called it a misunderstanding, and she knew it was probably hard for him to reach out first. She thought she should catch up to him first, apologize for the misunderstanding, and they could go back to how they were. She had no idea that by following him like this, they were about to get into a super awkward situation. She just hoped they could make up, but then came a turning point that changed everything for both of them. No one could have guessed that an unexpected moment of physical contact would become a complete game changer for their relationship. Just before it all happened, Hanul was desperately trying to catch up to her friend. Just as she had planned, Kim Minchul was completely stunned when he saw his friend running towards him, shouting his name. He definitely didn't want to have an awkward conversation, so he took off running too. He was still running to get away from her. She chased after him, shouting and asking why he was running, then telling him she had something to say to him. Even though he didn't want to hear it, she kept chasing him until she slammed right into a guy passing by. The sudden collision sent his entire cup of coffee flying right on her white t-shirt. Hanul immediately apologized for bumping into him, but he was more concerned about her t-shirt than the spilled drink. The guy politely said it was his fault too and offered her his number so he could transfer her money for the dry cleaning fee. She thought Minchul had run off and said she wanted to pay for the drink, but he immediately blocked her chest with his bag. Before she could object, he grabbed her hand and dragged her into the student club room. A stranger tried to stop them, but Minchul's fierce glare made him back down. A few minutes later, they finally reached the right room, and he immediately started looking for a new t-shirt. Hanul complained that she could have just used his bag to cover herself and gone back to the dorm, but he wasn't having any of her ideas. Minchul said he would give her a club t-shirt and that she should leave as soon as she changed. She thanked him for his help and then looked at her t-shirt in disgust, which was sticky and completely see-through. She couldn't help but think that her shirt was so sticky she should take it off before it dried. Realizing she had almost unconsciously taken off her shirt, she thought it was no big deal since it was normal for them. Hearing her reminder about the shirt, Minchul froze the moment he heard the voices of other students. Hanul cursed under her breath when she heard a strange guy's voice asking what Minchul was doing there. After hearing the guy suggest they go for a drink, he said in a threatening tone that they'd better not take him drinking tonight. The guy told him to move so he could put his stuff down, but he just told him to hand it over. His tone and expression were so convincing that his acquaintance couldn't refuse his request. After making sure all the students were far enough away, he went back to Hanul. To his surprise, he found the embarrassed girl squeezed into a locker. When asked why she wasn't coming out, her face turned even redder. She said she was stuck. She looked so embarrassed and frustrated that her friend couldn't help but laugh at the sight. He called her a little piggy, as usual, said she was hilarious, and told her she should work out with him. The moment he accidentally glanced at her assets, he immediately squeezed his eyes shut and told her to hurry up and get out. When he heard her yell that she couldn't get out, he started to help her, pulling her out by her hands. At first, Hanul was happy to finally be getting out, but she lost her footing and went flying right on her friend. The guy froze when he saw Hanul hovering above him, looking straight into his eyes. The awkward silence between them was broken by the loud sound of a door opening, which startled her. It was the student they knew trying to get back into the club room, but he was surprised to find the door locked. Hanul was terrified and instinctively clung tightly to the guy on the floor while his acquaintance knocked on the door outside. The girl was so focused on the potential danger that she didn't even realize she was pressed right up against his face. Minchul froze when he felt his body react to the contact and try to calm himself down. Luckily for him, the girl finally moved off his face once she was sure the student was gone. They had never really seen their relationship as anything more than a friendship, which always surprised people who knew them. During those typical high school days, they had sarcastically dodged cliché questions about their relationship. He had never seen Hanul as a girl and thought they would only ever be just friends. Then a classmate bluntly asked him if he was absolutely sure he would never see her that way. Just like him, she had never seen him as anything more than a simple friend. He had always been just a friend to her. Minchul confidently declared that he was so sure he'd be willing to sacrifice his manhood to prove it. When he threw the question back at Hanul, she grumbled that she'd shave her head if she ever saw him as a boyfriend. She got even angrier when she saw him teasing her, as usual. Unable to take his taunts anymore, she grabbed the back of his head and yanked him down hard to shut him up. She gave him a piece of her mind, saying she would never have feelings for someone like him. But what had just happened hit her so hard that it took her a few minutes to clear her head. She happened to notice his firm abs, just as he told her to move her chest. Minchul tried to explain that he had locked the door and she didn't have to worry, but he was so flustered his face turned red. Seeing him so embarrassed, she couldn't help but remember the time she saw him cry. She still couldn't figure out why she was feeling the same way inside as she did back then. Finally, Hanul snapped back to reality when he awkwardly apologized for putting his hand on her chest. He tried to explain that she was the one who pushed his hand there, and when she looked down, her face instantly turned bright red. In that moment, as if she finally realized what had happened, she stumbled back, begging for his forgiveness. She stumbled back so far that she didn't even notice she had bumped into the cabinet behind her, knocking all the books off the shelf. After that little touch, Minchul immediately snapped back to reality and gave her a cold glare. He threw the shirt at her and stood up, secretly glad he was able to keep his cool, though it was a real struggle. He turned around suspiciously and asked what she wanted, and then she just casually walked up behind him. His eyes widened when she apologized for suddenly ditching him back then. Then, she ruffled his hair like she always did and said she was going to be sore all over after today. Before he could react, she disappeared in a flash, saying she had an assignment to do, and then said her goodbyes. A few hours later, Hanul was still racking her brain over the assignment she hadn't touched in days. Minji calmly asked how much she had finished, but the answer was rather depressing. The rest of the team was also working hard on the group animation project, pulling all-nighters. She said she was in charge of the design and hated drawing people, but luckily this project didn't require it. Even though Hanul was a skilled artist, she still couldn't focus on her work. Her face turned as red as a ripe tomato when she remembered the scene of her friend lying right there. Knowing she had to get a grip, she jumped up and rushed to the restroom. Once alone, she slapped herself hard, trying to shake off the memories. She knew she was about to lose it because she just couldn't stop thinking about her friend. The girl tried to remind herself that it was Kim Minchul and not to make a big deal out of seeing his muscles. Meanwhile, Kim Minchul was in his room, equally unable to shake the chaotic thoughts from his mind. He also slapped himself when the image of how she looked back then popped in his head again. The guy couldn't help but think he was going crazy. Blushing like this, he tried to tell himself it was just a physical reaction and not because it was Hanul standing there. Still, no matter how hard he tried to suppress the constant stream of thoughts and fantasies, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Meanwhile, she was so busy with work that she immediately agreed to a group blind date over the phone. Minchul had no idea what she was up to and kept wondering what she was doing now. The next day, she asked Minji for help, who was clearly surprised by her sudden decision. She couldn't figure out why she had suddenly changed her mind, as she had always turned down similar offers before. The girl calmly replied that she needed to meet new people because her life had been too boring lately. When Minji said her makeup was done and she'd do her hair later, she immediately ran to change her clothes. At first, Minji thought she was overthinking it, but she was stunned when she saw how badly she was dressed. The outfit she chose was so inappropriate for the occasion, place, and purpose that it took her a moment to recover. Finally, she decided to take matters into her own hands and pick an outfit for her, after which she left for her date. Hanul's friends were stunned by how gorgeous and different she looked, though she felt a bit awkward at first. She shyly said that Minji had helped her and then followed the girls with a smile. Her phone screen showed a call from Minchul, but she decided not to pick up and call him back later. Eventually, they finally arrived at the place where the guys were already waiting for them. The guy in the middle, who was friends with the brown-haired girl, invited them with a pleasant smile to the already set table. The girls immediately blended in and started greeting the guys with smiles, but Hanul held back. Despite feeling very uncomfortable in this unfamiliar group, she greeted the new faces. Two of the guys were so stunned by how cute and beautiful she looked that they could barely manage a greeting in response. Only the guy sitting by the wall seemed composed, greeting her with a calm smile. Charles, the loudest guy in the group and a freshman in the physical education department, suggested they have a drink. Hanul had never had soju before and was surprised when they told her she had to do a shot first for the meeting. Feeling like she just couldn't let loose, she still went along with them and raised her glass just like they did. At that moment, she had no idea that within an hour of the alcohol arriving, she would become so bold and relaxed. She liked the drink so much that she quickly finished 3 whole bottles of soju. She was visibly surprised when a shy guy next to her handed her some water, saying she might have a hangover tomorrow. Hanul happily took the glass and looked closely at the bottle cap. When they asked if she knew a certain game, she said she had heard of it but never played, and she agreed to try the drinking game. She confidently declared she would beat everyone in one go, but she didn't seem to understand how difficult it was. Sung Yun, who was sitting next to her, advised her that if she flicked the bottle cap from top to bottom, it would fly forward perfectly. The others started jeering, saying she would definitely miss on her first try, but the result surprised everyone. Seeing their reactions, her eyes lit up, thinking she had succeeded. She patted Sung Hun's arm, gushing about how amazing he was for helping her succeed on the first try. She was clearly enjoying the gathering, finally able to relax and be herself. A flustered Sung Hun asked if he could ask her a personal question, and she agreed. He seemed to have trouble getting the words out, but he finally asked if she had a boyfriend, much to her surprise. Even he was surprised he had asked the question and followed up by asking if the handsome and super popular guy from their school was her boyfriend. It then dawned on her, and she fumed, realizing that Kim Minchul always being around was precisely the reason she didn't have a boyfriend. Her friend next to her saw her expression and laughed, explaining that they were just childhood friends, not a couple. Hanul huffed that they weren't dating like everyone thought. She insisted that they had been together since they were kids and had no secrets between them, which was why they seemed so close. The thought of no secrets made her recall a recent incident. Just as she started replaying the details, she slapped herself across the face, startling everyone. She wondered how she could have completely forgotten about that incident, only for it to pop up now. The man at the next table shouted for his pasta and then made a strange gesture with a ketchup bottle, which agitated her even more, forcing her to relive every detail of what had happened. She tried to look away to distract herself, but then she saw him shaking the bottle. Knowing she had to find a way to forget about it, she decided right then and there to get wasted tonight and down her soju in one go. No sooner had the words left her mouth than her head slammed onto the table, scaring everyone even more. A few seconds later, she finally came to her senses when her phone buzzed with a text from Kim Minchul. She was shocked that he was acting as if nothing had happened while she was stuck on this boring date, trying to forget about it. Hanul squeezed her eyes shut again, completely confused about what was wrong with her. Just then, Sung Hun's hand touched her forehead, clearly worried if she was okay. He asked if she had a headache, but she was unwilling to admit the intense pain she was feeling, both physically and mentally. The guy told her the others had gone to buy hangover medicine and asked if she had hit her head when she fell. He touched her back to get her attention, trying to get her to turn so he could check her forehead. As Sung Hun leaned in closer than he should have, Hanul's vision started to blur. As if by fate, Minchul appeared right at that moment and made sure everyone knew he was there. It turned out he was working as a server at the restaurant and brought over the 2 bottles of beer they had ordered earlier. Just then, the rest of the group returned, wondering how Hanul was doing. They laughed, saying she was clearly drunk, but when they saw Kim Minchul, everyone froze. At first, Hanul thought she was hallucinating, but to her greater surprise, she almost blurted out that he was handsome. She figured she must still be drunk and out of it, wishing she could just pass out again. Just as her forehead was about to hit the table, a large hand appeared at the last second. Kim Minchul irritably asked if she was so drunk she was about to slam her head on the table. As he spoke, he slowly turned to see the others standing right behind him. He looked at them intently and immediately demanded to know how much she had drunk, but they stammered, finding it hard to give a clear answer. Minchul was stunned by how much she had had and started scolding her for drinking so much. He rummaged through his apron, handed her a can of something, told her to stop drinking, and said he had to get back to work. He left so quickly he didn't even hear the group whispering about how handsome he was. Hanul calmly stood up, saying she was hot from the alcohol and needed some air. You should have seen the look on her face when she saw Minchul taking out the trash. She confronted him, asking why he didn't tell her where he worked, but he just said he already had. He smirked, popping a lollipop into his mouth, and asked if it was embarrassing to be caught flirting with another guy. Hanul handed him the drink can, telling him to take back what he had swiped from the store, but he claimed he had paid for it. She was surprised he was so thoughtful and retracted her hand. To her shock, he demanded the drink back, saying he shouldn't have been so nice to her. Minchul complained that she had the nerve to go out and have fun and not even answer his calls. She ignored him and just chugged the drink. She froze when he leaned in and noticed she was wearing makeup. His gaze made her blush, but he just said in his usual tone that drawing more stripes on a pumpkin doesn't make it a watermelon. She told him to look in a mirror first, but he confidently declared he was a watermelon to begin with. Meanwhile, the group of friends was still in shock over what had just happened. The girl just couldn't get over how handsome Minchul was in person. She kept saying he was much better looking than in his photos and was probably just not photogenic. When they started talking about other handsome guys and mentioned Jae-hee from their department, her friend was clearly surprised. The girls immediately started gushing, saying he was super handsome too, but his looks were a different type from Kim Minchul's. Sung Yin confessed that he was close with Jae's older brother, who had mentioned there were a lot of rumors about Kim Jae. The girls immediately pressured him to spill the tea, as they all had crushes on him and looked up to him. Meanwhile, Minchul picked up his phone and said in surprise that he had to go. He told Hanul that more than 15 minutes had passed, and he hadn't even noticed how quickly the time flew by. As a parting shot, he gave her a smirk and asked if she had taken a liking to any of the guys. She glared at him, asking what good it would do him to know, and he said maybe one of them could be her first boyfriend. Hanul was clearly unhappy with his claim that he would screen people and started pounding on his back. In the end, he patted her on the head, said he had to go, and that if she got a boyfriend, he would give the guy a harsh interrogation. Alone, she remembered she should head back too, and realized it had been a long time since they had talked like that. She thought to herself that maybe it was a good thing she decided to go on the group date. Just then, she accidentally bumped into Sung-han. She had just asked why he was out there when he started explaining that he was worried because she had been gone for a long time. Their friends were so engrossed in their gossip that they hadn't even noticed he had left. They were in the middle of a heated discussion about the prepared rumors about Jae Sunbi and concluded that even if they were just rumors, they were pretty juicy. The girls were shocked that someone like him was living a double life and was into that kind of thing. What they didn't know was that the object of their affection was currently spending time at one of those very places. He was totally playing with the girl's feelings, and she was already head over heels for him. She clearly didn't get the picture, as he was absent-minded and distracted the whole time. Even when she asked him directly, he remained lost in his own thoughts, barely reacting to her. Jae just patted her head absent-mindedly, saying he must have forgotten something. The girl asked him directly why he couldn't focus on her, and if it had to do with them doing something different today. Still deep in thought, he replied that it was because he felt like he had forgotten something crucial. Then he finally remembered and blurted out with a look of horror that he had an assignment due before midnight. The girl couldn't believe he was just ditching her like that, but he simply apologized and said they'd meet up next time. Despite completely bailing on her, he felt no guilt at all and even smiled at the thought. He got home, took a casual shower, and then started on his assignment. He grabbed all 3 USB drives, determined to get it over with, and started searching for the video file. He was stunned when he realized he had the right USB drive all along, and the one he had lent to Hanul was the completely wrong one. Meanwhile, Hanul was outside with her new companion, confidently saying she wasn't cold. Suddenly, Sung-han started talking again about how she and Minchul were really close. The girl awkwardly agreed, attributing it to them being childhood friends and not just casual acquaintances. She frowned again when he asked once more if there were any romantic feelings between them, since they looked like a couple. After confirming that she wouldn't have come if she had a boyfriend, he unexpectedly blurted out that he liked her. He knew it might sound a bit sudden, considering they had just met. Nevertheless, he managed to smile and ask her to be his girlfriend, which caught her completely off guard. What they didn't know was that Kim Minchul was secretly eavesdropping on the entire conversation, clearly not expecting someone to be interested in her so soon. The next day, while sitting tiredly on the train, he happened to see Minji. She said she had also decided to go home to see her parents, and then asked why he was traveling alone. Without Hanul, he just mumbled distractedly that she was probably on a date with her boyfriend. At first, she reacted calmly as usual, but she was surprised when she grasped the meaning of his words. The news hit her so hard that she immediately repeated her question loudly, asking when she had suddenly gotten a boyfriend. Upon learning it all happened after a group date, she immediately picked up her phone. Seeing that the girl who used to reply instantly was now unresponsive, Minji seemed to believe it. She was distracted when she saw him smiling and petting the campus cat, which had grown quite large. She was surprised at how calm he was, as she had expected a different reaction from him. He was surprised when she said he used to always chase away other guys who tried to get close to Hanul. Minchul smugly claimed he wasn't chasing them away, just protecting Hanul from shady characters. When she asked if she needed his permission for everything she did, he couldn't help but recall their argument. He ended by saying she was an adult and could make her own decisions. But even as he said it, his expression was absolutely terrifying, as if warning the potential boyfriend that he would regret it if he crossed the line. Meanwhile, Hanul was relaxing at her new companion's house, completely captivated by his adorable hamster. She smiled sweetly, saying she wanted a soda, while secretly wondering if she should give this dating thing a try. The girl felt it wasn't an official relationship, more like testing the waters. In her mind, she compared it to the process of getting to know someone before a first date. She took the opportunity to wonder if her lipstick looked okay today. She decided it didn't matter whether they were dating or just hanging out a few times. When he suggested they start on her homework, she smiled and opened her laptop. Hanul sighed, saying she just needed to watch this masterpiece of a film and write a review. Sung-han asked if she wanted him to watch it with her, since she said she needed to write a good review to pass. She smiled and thanked him for offering to help with her homework and watch the movie. As soon as he sat next to her, she immediately realized they were sitting too close, their shoulders almost touching. She quickly started browsing the list of movies on the USB drive she got from Jae-hee-sunbi. To her surprise, the movie turned out to be quite explicit and erotic. Hanul couldn't believe her eyes and was immediately hit by a wave of embarrassment. Sung-hun was just as surprised as he had expected in a normal movie. A slice-of-life type of movie. The girl was stunned, and the only thing she could think to do was quickly shut the laptop. She tried to explain that sometimes world-class films could be a bit, well, bold, and that she didn't mean to play it. Hanul immediately realized she had the wrong USB drive, and noted it was the same kind of movie they used to watch in middle school. She managed to close the video with difficulty and started frantically searching for files on her laptop. She suggested they watch something else, at which point she noticed a video with numbers and letters in the title. Unfortunately, the second video was no different in nature from the first, which made her even more depressed. As she kept learning about the private lives of the guys around her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. Hanul decided to apologize for bringing the wrong USB drive, but she froze when she felt their eyes meet. She didn't understand why he was looking at her like that or when he had gotten so close, until he leaned in even closer. She quickly pulled back a little and asked him directly what he was doing. He nervously answered her question with another question, asking if now was a good time. When she asked why he wanted to kiss her when they weren't even dating, they both looked down awkwardly. Hanul was clueless about relationships and couldn't tell if this was normal or if he just saw her as an easy target. Amidst these frustrating thoughts, she quickly packed her things and rushed for the door. Sung-hun tried to stop her, but she ignored him, so he grabbed her arm and asked if he had scared her. He tried to explain that it was perfectly normal nowadays to have some physical contact before making a relationship official. She couldn't understand what he meant by needing to test the waters before committing to a relationship. Seeing her confusion, he said it was just a kiss, not the end of the world. They immediately started arguing, their voices getting louder and louder until they heard a loud slap from behind them. Hanul and Sung-hun slowly turned around, trying to figure out what had just happened. To their surprise, the person who had just been slapped was none other than Jae-hee-sunbi. When he saw a familiar face, he immediately put on a friendly smile, even though his cheek was stinging. He immediately came over to them, saying he definitely hadn't expected to see her outside of the university. Jae immediately asked what she was doing here, but she was too surprised and asked him the same question. He almost answered, but his attention was immediately drawn to the fact that Sung-hun was still holding her hand tightly. The man gave a thoughtful smirk, sensing something was off. Sung-hun acted nonchalant and said he was talking to his girlfriend and that he should leave them alone. She had just angrily asked how she had suddenly become his girlfriend and tried to pull away when he gripped her hand even tighter. He reminded her in a threatening tone that they had started dating yesterday, which made her wonder how a person could change so quickly. Jae-hee-sunbi saw the tense atmosphere and used his own hand to separate them, trying to de-escalate the situation. He immediately shielded her with his back, saying he didn't care what their relationship was, but using violence was wrong. His interference really annoyed Sung-hun, so he said it was their business and he had no right to interfere. Despite the kid's provocation, Jae-hee remained calm and simply told him that he was her senior. He also advised him to keep his voice down, as many students lived in the area. The moment he mentioned rumors, Sung-hun smirked and said the only rumor would be about him getting slapped. Jae-hee didn't seem flustered at all, just shrugging with a hint of a smirk as a cunning plan formed in his mind. He waited for the right moment and pointed to a nearby building, saying someone was watching them from upstairs. Sung-hun scanned the area, ready to call his bluff on the stupid joke, but they were already gone. While the guy was still trying to figure out what happened, Hanul and Jae-hee had already run a good distance away. He stopped and chuckled, saying it was the only way to deal with loudmouths like that. He then turned to the girl and asked how she was feeling, but she looked to be in bad shape, fighting the urge to vomit. She managed to say she had no energy left at all. He apologized for what he did and offered to pat her back comfortingly, but she was clearly resistant. The moment he got close, the scent of his cologne made her even more nauseous, and she couldn't help but throw up. Hanul was mortified that she had not only thrown up on her university senior, but on a super handsome one like him. Realizing he couldn't walk around like that, he reacted to the situation quite calmly and suggested they go to a dry cleaner. After she apologized again, he said it was fine and told her not to worry, and she looked up. Unlike the girl, he wasn't the least bit embarrassed about being shirtless and just calmly asked how she was feeling. Hanul was so stunned by his hot body that she couldn't hide her embarrassment. She cringed, saying she felt terrible, considering he was being as nice as an angel to her. She felt bad that he had to take off his shirt because of her and might catch a cold, but he again assured her that everything was fine. When he said the shirt would be dry in about an hour and a half, the girl once again thought he was an angel. She clearly couldn't believe he found the whole thing amusing, and despite his smile, she felt he was angry with her now. When she got on her knees and said she would pay for the cleaning, emotional damages, and everything, Jae started to comfort her again. The girl cried that she felt terrible and would do anything for him to make up for what happened. The boy was so stunned by her reaction that he was speechless for the first few seconds. Eventually, he became interested in her offer of a wish and decided to take her up on it. Hearing this, she immediately yelled that she had thrown up on an angel, and he was only asking for one wish in return. Jae leaned down to the girl, told her to calm down, and added that he would take 3 wishes, just as she said. He also stated that it was partly his fault, as he had practically made her run with a heavy bag. The girl suddenly remembered that, besides her laptop, she also had Kim Minchul's jacket in her bag. She could lend him a jacket. The moment she took it out, the USB drive that had caused all the trouble today accidentally fell out. They both froze, completely stunned, because that was the very USB drive he had been looking for. Knowing this could lead to another extremely awkward moment, she frowned and cursed everything in her head. Her fantasy that he wouldn't notice anything was shattered when he chuckled and said she had accidentally taken the wrong USB drive. She explained that while he was trying on Minchul's sweater, she had opened a video and then immediately closed it. The boy acted nonchalant and said he was actually a bit embarrassed that she had taken a USB drive full of suspicious content. Hanul retorted that there was also a classic film on it, but she omitted the adult part. He gave a smirk, recalling how she said she had closed the video immediately and wondered how she could remember it so clearly. His words immediately made her anxious, and she blurted out that it was a movie she had watched in middle school. She accidentally specified that the movie had inspired a dream of hers, which was why she recognized it instantly. He immediately seized on that, wanting to know more about her dream, but she was too flustered to say it. It seemed her words annoyed Jae even more, as he gave a super suspicious smile. She felt like she had been struck by lightning when she heard him say very casually that this was his first wish. That day, Hanul learned to think before she spoke, because an angel could turn into an outright devil in an instant. She earnestly asked him not to laugh and said she really liked the kissing scene in that movie and wanted to try it. The guy was stunned, realizing she just meant she naively wanted to kiss someone she loved like that. Meanwhile, Kim Minchul finally returned to his hometown to see his mom. The moment he walked in the door, something flew at him, accompanied by his mom's yelling, calling him a lazy, good-for-nothing. Kwon Hyun-suk reminded him that he was supposed to come home every weekend and asked where on earth he had been. Despite his attempts to explain, she hit him again, saying he hadn't shown his face for 3 whole weeks. After helping around the house for a few hours, he asked if that was the only reason she wanted him around. She said it was the least he could do after she helped him find a place to live, even if it was just his grandmother's empty house. She then pointed to a pile of snacks she had packed and told him to take them to Hanul. Minchul was surprised she was so concerned about his girlfriend instead of giving him anything. Before he could respond, they heard the doorbell, announcing the arrival of their long-awaited guest. It was Hanul's mom, Park Yoon Seo Young, whom his mom had kept in touch with all these years. The kind lady immediately saw Kim Minchul, who bowed deeply and greeted her with a smile. She commented on how polite he was and reached out to pat his head. He bowed even deeper to let her stroke his hair, while his mom asked in surprise about the bag she brought. She smiled and reminded them they had planned to get together and that she had brought snacks and drinks. Both of them were very surprised when she suddenly invited Minchul to join them. Park Yoon Seo Young sadly asked him to stay a little longer, but he lied outright that he was already late. Despite the bag being super heavy, he took it, ready to give it to Hanul. Her mom asked one last thing of him, which was to take good care of her daughter, saying she could rest easy knowing they were always together. He calmly agreed and bowed his head again for her path. After an hour-long bumpy bus ride, Minchul tried to stretch his stiff neck from the journey. He stared thoughtfully at the bags in his hands, wondering how on earth he was going to give them to her. Minchul immediately guessed she was with her boyfriend and kept thinking of different scenarios, figuring this was something she should handle on her own. He texted her that she could come to his place to pick up the bags. Meanwhile, the girl was still with Jae Sunbi, who had put her in a very awkward situation. Even though he had promised not to laugh at her silly dream, he just couldn't help it. That little confession had him roaring with laughter, and he kept repeating it, unable to stop laughing. She tried to call him out on it, but he told her to wait because just looking at her face made him laugh even harder. He finally calmed down and even said her dream was cute, adding that she was like a schoolgirl. He accidentally touched her shoulder and said the guy who steals her first kiss would be a lucky one. He was surprised when she said he was much more annoying than she had imagined when she saw him at university. He laughed again, thinking to himself that, just like that time at his place, Hanul wasn't falling for his tricks. Luckily for her, the shirt was finally presentable, and they could leave the dry cleaners. He said he would return her sweater after washing it, and asked for a number so he could contact her later. Jae figured this way he could contact her to return the sweater and started looking for his phone. The man was about to say goodbye, but stopped to whisper that he promised to be more charming next time. "Stop whispering," she said. "It gives me the creeps." But he just laughed himself again. She rubbed her ears, lost in thought, then froze when her stomach started to growl. Realizing she had nothing prepared and hadn't eaten since lunch, she was ecstatic when she saw Minchul's text. Finally at the place, she barged right in, demanding her snacks as if she owned the place. He hadn't expected her so late, and it's safe to say he wasn't dressed for company. When she saw him, she rubbed her eyes so hard they squeaked, and well, it was quite a sight. "Put some clothes on," she yelled. "Can't you even shower in your own house?" Finally, he decided to get straight to the point. "Wait a minute," he said. "I'll put on some clothes and get your snacks." She did as he said, taking in the scene while waiting for her friend. A few minutes later, Minchul finally came downstairs and opened the fridge while she interrogated him about what was inside. He handed her the bags, saying they were filled with her favorite things. Watching her get so happy over food, imagine her surprise when she rummaged through all the snacks and accidentally found a bottle of whiskey. Minchul immediately guessed his mom must have grabbed the wrong bags in a hurry, which explained why they were so heavy. He immediately stopped his friend, telling her to put it back because they had accidentally given him the wrong bags. A mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. She grinned and suggested they just have a little taste. The man tried to talk her out of it, but she said she'd talk to his mom later and mentioned something she had read online about his tastes. He finally compromised, saying they would only have one drink, for which Hanul teased him. After getting everything ready, they finally sat down at the table and began to taste the drink they had never had before. Little did the two of them know what their little get-together would turn into a few hours later, but more on that later. At first, Hanul was not pleased with the unexpected strength of the drink she had been longing for. Only then did they remember to check the alcohol content, which they initially thought was around 20 proof. Imagine their surprise when they actually read the label. It read 80 proof. Hanul said, "Well, we'll have to mix it with some soda." Then they went back to tasting it. This time, the young couple finally enjoyed the taste of their drink. She mentioned different cocktail ideas, and when he suggested they try one, she immediately asked to change into her pajamas. She said, "The waistband of my shorts is too tight and it's bothering me, so I need to wear something looser." In any case, she didn't like the clothes he proudly handed her. Seeing her in his clothes, he burst out laughing and called her a hobbit, even though she was actually taller than average. Her annoyance instantly vanished when he said he had made some more snacks while she was changing. Walking towards him, she couldn't help but wonder just how different their clothing sizes were. The girl suddenly felt a strange churning in her stomach and felt the need to drink something to wash the bad stuff down. So a little while later, she was already dead drunk, yet still trying to convince Minchul that she was perfectly fine. And he, in turn, tried to tell her she was completely drunk, not realizing he was talking to a brick wall. When they both realized this, they both burst out laughing and collapsed onto the floor. Minchul gently stroked her hair and asked her how things were going with the guy she liked. To his surprise, she just calmly said that she didn't have a crush on anyone and no one had confessed to her. A mischievous smile appeared on his face which Hanul clearly noticed. He blurted out that he knew all along she couldn't have possibly received a confession on the first day they met. The boy kept teasing her, saying everyone thought she was a boy in elementary school. She immediately retorted, reminding him that all the girls in elementary school used to put makeup on him because he was so pretty. They kept trading barbs, completely unaware that the distance between them was rapidly closing. Then, in an instant, their faces were too close, and unexpected thoughts began to flood Hanul's mind. Before she could even react, he had covered her lips with his, kissing her forcefully and giving her no chance to respond. When they finally pulled apart, both were utterly shocked by what they had just done. But right after, Minchul pulled her in tighter and kissed her passionately. Hanul knew this was probably wrong on so many levels, but she couldn't resist the crazy impulse. She couldn't understand why they were suddenly making out, as she had always imagined her first kiss would be with someone she loved. This thought was interrupted by the unexpected sensation of his tongue, and she realized this was even better than she had dreamed. She was enjoying it so much that when he suddenly pulled away, she was momentarily at a loss. To her shock, he completely lost his composure and blurted out, asking if she'd always been so well endowed. After he asked, she just thoughtfully tugged at the hem of her t-shirt and said she hadn't changed since high school. Just as she did that, she suddenly noticed blood dripping from Minchul's nose. She immediately burst out laughing, asking if he was getting a nosebleed just from seeing her chest like a little kid. The girl tried to help him, telling him to tilt his head back so he wouldn't get too much blood on himself. He didn't even realize he had lost his balance and accidentally fell backward, his legs spreading open in front of her. Hanul quickly crawled closer to look him over, and he was clearly embarrassed. Her hand slid under his t-shirt without a second thought, as if it was what she had wanted to do all along. Minchul said awkwardly that his abs were so smooth because he never worked out, which only piqued her interest more. He was surprised by how persistently she explored his body and demanded he flex his muscles. When she insisted even more for him to do it, the boy's face instantly turned red as a tomato. He couldn't take it anymore, grabbed her hand, and pulled her over. After pulling her to him, Minchul told her to stop, then blurted out that he wanted to touch her too, and his hands began to wander. She immediately looked away, telling him he shouldn't do that because she gets shy when others touch her. Minchul didn't even know what confused him more, because right after that innocent comment, she started touching him all over again. He'd had enough, grabbed both her hands, and asked irritably if she wasn't shy when she was the one touching him. To her surprise, he suddenly started tickling her, as if to teach her a lesson. She was practically begging him to stop, but instead, he held her hands above her head and continued to tickle her. Finally, exhausted from the tickling, she yelled at him to stop. Minchul stopped and looked her over carefully. Her clothes had become disheveled during the intense tickle fight. He watched her reaction as his hands explored her body, thinking he must be crazy. Even so, he couldn't help himself and quickly leaned down, wanting to do the same thing again with his mouth. Hanul felt a wonderful mix of ticklishness and pleasure, but she told him to lift his head when she noticed something strange. It seemed Minchul was overwhelmed by all the sensations, and his nose had started bleeding again. Seeing this, she anxiously asked if it was because of overexertion or because he was too obsessed with her chest. The boy hurriedly wiped away the blood and said no, but he still looked a bit dazed after saying it. He glanced at her chest again and said that maybe she was right. Hanul didn't understand why he was just sitting there when the blood could easily stain his clothes. Seeing his nose was still bleeding, she started to lick the blood directly off his face. She immediately recoiled when her tongue tasted the unpleasant, metallic flavor of blood. To her surprise, Minchul pounced on her again for a passionate kiss, giving her no time to think. Afterwards, she pulled back in complete disgust, saying her mouth was now full of his blood. Despite her warning, Minchul was too worked up to think about such minor details. Hanul tried to get him to stop, but he had no intention of backing down. Her face turned red again when she felt his fingers suddenly slip under her shorts. She was filled with mixed emotions by his actions, but when she told him to stop, he wouldn't listen. Her face burned even hotter when she glanced down and saw his shorts. She knew exactly what was coming next and couldn't believe it was happening with Minchul. Minchul seemed so lost in the moment he could barely think, but he still asked her what was on her mind. She couldn't help but replay everything in her mind, especially how wonderful the kiss had been. She decided once again that he was much better than she had ever imagined. After thinking about trying something she had seen in the movies, she suddenly asked him on the spot if he had any protection. The girl's daydream came to a screeching halt, leaving her feeling even more dazed. She grabbed her hair in surprise, as if to check whether she was awake or dreaming. Hanul was shocked to find she remembered everything that had happened between them, which baffled her since she had been blackout drunk. She thought she had drunk enough to forget the whole damn thing. Upon hearing the answer no, she stormed into his room and collapsed onto his bed. After everything that happened last night, the girl didn't know how she could face him again. Just as she was wondering where he was, her alarm went off, reminding her it was time for class. Meanwhile, Kim Min-ho had already arrived at the university, and everyone was asking him why he wasn't answering his phone. To everyone's surprise, after what happened last night, he was so distracted he couldn't even answer their questions. The guy asked another person why he was acting so strange, but he just said he'd been like that since this morning. He told them to stop spacing out, saying he should join them for a drink since there would be girls there. He just mumbled vaguely, as if struggling to think, saying the problem wasn't that he wouldn't go, but that he was always a buzzkill. He tried to get out of it by saying he had to work until 7, but they were meeting right after his shift ended. When he finally agreed to go for a little while, the guy was excited. Minchul heard him say he would post a notice in the group chat, but he himself was still completely out of it. Just as he tried to focus again, memories of everything they did yesterday flashed through his mind. The mere thought of her made his face turn red again, which panicked his friends even more. Meanwhile, an equally distracted Hanul finally breathed a sigh of relief after her last class ended. Her behavior was just as baffling to everyone around her, as her mood kept switching like crazy. She knew things were bad when she couldn't stop thinking about yesterday and how to fix it. Even in class, Hanul was so desperate that she snapped at the girl next to her. She asked what was so funny, saying she wasn't in the mood. They immediately told her to take a look too. Her classmate showed her phone screen, which displayed a new, popular adult webtoon. She paused to think when the girl added that she highly recommended the webtoon if she didn't mind certain scenes. That night, Minchul went to the event after all, and as usual, girls were trying to hit on him. They tried everything to get close to him, hoping for the slightest chance to catch his attention. However, he was clearly not interested in any of it, so he responded coolly to every suggestion. A girl suddenly announced that they were out of beer and that they should get more. Realizing this was his chance to escape, he immediately jumped up and said he would go get some himself. Before heading out, he checked his chat with Hanul one last time, wondering why she hadn't messaged him yet. Meanwhile, Hanul was engrossed in a new webtoon and couldn't put it down all day. She couldn't wait to read the next chapter, but it was a disaster when she ran out of reading passes. The girl rushed to the store, but even there, she couldn't tear herself away from her steamy webtoon. And just like that, she accidentally ended up near the adult products section and froze. She wanted to keep walking, but something kept her from looking away or forgetting about it. Hanul couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if either of them had had one of those, yesterday. Her mind was instantly filled with all sorts of ideas and fantasies about how things could have gone. Suddenly, she was shocked at herself for always thinking about these things, and the webtoon was only fanning the flames. A blush crept on her face when she unexpectedly found herself thinking that maybe she really did want to try those things. When she started thinking about who she'd want to try all these things with, Minchul immediately popped in her head. Her brain instantly exploded with fantasies, imagining that he would want to experience it all with her too. And can you believe it? Right then and there, Kim Minchul walked into the store. Obviously, this was the perfect opportunity to clear the air, especially since they hadn't messaged each other once. Although the boy was terrified and didn't know what to say, the girl was secretly thrilled that this was all happening. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw that she had bought the very thing they were missing that time. When he finally worked up the courage to bring it up, the girl's face lit up like a Christmas tree. But to her disappointment, he said they should pretend it never happened, saying they were drunk and made a mistake. He was shocked when he turned around and saw her heartbroken expression after he said that. Minchul had no idea what was wrong with her and became extremely anxious because of her reaction. Mortified, she realized he had no interest in taking things to that level with her at all. Finally, She pulled herself together, told him to forget everything that happened, and warned him not to be awkward about it. She tried to give him a friendly pat on the back, saying everything was fine now, but he was not having it. Hanul laughed and declared a pat to celebrate their renewed friendship, calling him a weakling. The moment she mentioned his back muscles were firm and asked if he worked out, he cursed at her. Let's just say what he said was not very nice. Imagine their surprise when he accidentally touched her waist and she immediately grabbed him. They both instantly realized what was happening and jumped apart as if they'd been burned. They knew they should keep their distance and act normal, but their bodies were betraying them. Hanul tried to make a run for it, using the excuse that her dorm's curfew was approaching, but she tripped and nearly fell. At the last second, Minchul caught her and steadied her, saving her from faceplant. However, the close contact only flustered them more, especially with everything pushing them toward each other. They were so shocked by what was happening that they got goosebumps and couldn't say a word. She couldn't help but think about how much she wanted to hug him, a real hug. Minchul couldn't believe his ears when she asked if she could spend the night at his place. After she said it, they practically flew back to his place, where the atmosphere quickly heated up. God, he was feeling that intense desire again, and it was getting harder and harder to suppress. He managed to pull away, sighing that his bedroom was upstairs. He took her hand and told her to wrap her arms around his neck so he could carry her up. The next thing she knew, she was in his arms, and a few seconds later, they were in his room. Hanul didn't even realize she was back in his bed so quickly. Equally flustered, Minchul froze, his eyes once again glued to her face. He could hardly believe this was happening between them, feeling like their 20-year friendship was on the line. Seeing his thoughtful gaze, she couldn't help but take it as an invitation to relax, and her jacket immediately came open. Despite all his worries and hesitation, he followed her lead and took off his own shirt as well. In the blink of an eye, they were entangled, as if they had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. Hanul immediately began to wonder if she had thought this through, because now that she was sober, things felt much more complicated. However, she was enjoying what was happening, which made her instantly wonder if she was a total pervert. Minchul watched her every move, making sure she was actually enjoying it. He kept checking if he was doing okay, which put her a little more at ease. Unfortunately for Hanul, her first time was harder than expected, but Minchul was very considerate. The boy gently wiped away her tears, trying to be supportive without messing things up or leaving a bad impression. She tried to blame him for what he was doing, but she froze when his hand slid down her back. Minchul was clearly amused by her reaction and couldn't help but ask if she was feeling okay. Thanks to his skillful touch, the pain finally subsided, and she began to feel a pleasant sensation in her lower abdomen. To her surprise, before she could fully enjoy this new feeling, he suddenly pulled away. Minchul tried to explain that it was his first time too, and that he had been holding back for a long time. Their eyes met again, and then she boldly suggested they try again. She was tired of his constant teasing and suggested they get some sleep. He then had a dream where they were once chasing butterflies, and he couldn't keep up with her and tripped. The girl immediately ran to her friend's side and asked if he was okay. He was taken aback when she said she had a secret to show him, and then she held out her hand. The next morning, Minchul woke up on the floor because the girl had taken over the entire bed. After they both got ready, they headed to the university, where Hanul met up with her best friends. As the girls walked past the basketball court, they noticed the tryouts had started. With the official tournament only 2 weeks away, they started cheering for their friends. One of the girls started cheering for her friend, Lee Johan, who immediately gave them a victory sign. After that, they got depressed because their art department team usually couldn't even make it past the preliminaries. When they pointed out the court where the business and design departments were facing off, Hanul's gaze immediately shot over. She instantly spotted Minchul, who made a shot and scored for his team. Thanks to his excellent performance, their team was completely crushing the opponent. It seemed Minchul himself wasn't very excited about the win, and sensing Hanul's gaze, he glanced over. Even after what had happened between them last night, he decided to act as if nothing was wrong. Hanul didn't quite understand his actions and was surprised when he came over sometime after the game. She was about to leave when she heard him ask if she was going to the art gallery. She looked down and saw Kim Minchul, who suggested they go together. She barely let him get close, giving rather cold answers to his questions, which to her were old news. The moment he suggested they have dinner together, she couldn't help but wonder if he was just pretending everything was normal. Lost in thought, she was so distracted that she didn't even see a cyclist rushing toward them. Minchul barely managed to pull her close, watching in disbelief as the person sped away. He tried to play it cool, but Hanul found it extremely difficult, which flustered her even more. Meanwhile, her study group was back to slaving away at their assignment, even though the deadline was tomorrow. Minji coolly suggested her exhausted classmate take a break, saying he couldn't take it anymore and needed to sleep for a bit. He stood up and grabbed his bedding. With a pillow in hand, he made himself a bed right on the table and asked them to wake him up in 2 hours. Minji got up to get coffee with Hanul, but she froze when she saw Hanul's frustrated expression. The girl was repeatedly rewriting her post on that advice website, wanting to share what had happened to her. She was going crazy over Minchul's nonchalant attitude and just wanted to get some advice from strangers. Hanul was so lost in her own thoughts that she didn't even notice Minji sneak up behind her. She jumped back in fright, but her friend had already read her post and put 2 and 2 together. She clearly didn't want to share this with her friends and just stared ahead in a panic. When they asked her what was wrong, she finally spilled everything that had happened between them, and Minji's hand holding her cup tightened like crazy. Hanul tried to point out the spilled coffee, but she was too shocked to even notice. The next moment, she was grilling Hanul about whether she had really gone all the way with Minchul. The girl was startled by the sudden question and told her to keep her voice down, then immediately became flustered. She nervously clutched her hoodie, trying to hide her blushing face, and then admitted that, yes, it happened. Minji finally calmed down and asked why she hadn't said anything and if they were together now. Upon hearing they weren't dating, she immediately became furious at Kim Minchul for his jerk-like behavior. She knew Hanul wanted it too, but she was still angry at the guy and asked Hanul what was bothering her. The girl added that she didn't even know how she felt about him, because although her heart raced when she saw him, it felt more like a physical reaction. Minji was stunned when Hanul declared she couldn't imagine dating Minchul and that the very thought made her want to puke. However, her friend reminded her that he was the first person who came to mind when she was thinking about the right person in the store. Hanul agreed, thinking it was because he would never do anything to hurt her. Minji froze when she added that he was now acting completely normal, as if nothing had ever happened. The girl brought up Hanul's comment about it not being a big deal and asked if she really felt that way. After thinking for a moment, she suggested Hanul try acting the way she said she felt as a way to figure out his true feelings. It seems the girls got so caught up in their conversation that they forgot to wake up their classmate sleeping in the study room. Meanwhile, Hanul was already contacting her friend, asking if she could go pick him up for lunch. She squeezed her sandwich in surprise when he told her not to bother and that he'd come over himself after he was done. Despite being visibly thrown off by his blunt reply, she decided to go ahead with her plan. All in all, he had made her curious enough to go, even if it meant waiting. Seeing students leave the lecture hall, she followed them, surprised at how big their classroom was. Before she could even get her bearings, one of Minchul's classmates pointed at her. She was startled when someone shouted, "It's Hanul," and countless pairs of eyes locked onto her. They immediately surrounded her, going on and on about how cute she was and asking if it was really her. Minchul didn't understand what was happening and tried to figure out why there was such a crowd. After a few seconds, he finally spotted Hanul, completely surrounded by the classmates he studied with. He could see she was overwhelmed by the attention and demanded that everyone back off. The boy quickly grabbed her hand, pulled her out of the crowd, and angrily snapped at the people around them. His friend tried to explain that he had kept her so well hidden that they were just extra curious. Eventually, they managed to get away from the crowd, and he said to her, "This is why I told you not to come." He looked at her in disappointment, seeing how even a light jog had exhausted her. She practically collapsed onto a bench and heard it again. If she gets out of breath this easily, she needs to exercise. In response, she just wearily rested her head on his arm, saying she didn't feel well. In that moment, she couldn't help but remember Minji's advice on what she should do to find out his true feelings. The advice was to get close to him at the right moment, and just like that, she noticed his ears turning red. She was about to get a closer look at his face when she was interrupted by her senior, Jae-hee, who had suddenly appeared behind her. She immediately started yelling at him, not even noticing that she had subconsciously punched Minchul hard. The guy seemed to be enjoying the situation and shamelessly asked who this man next to her was. Minchul was extremely annoyed by his appearance, which meant a showdown between the two popular handsome guys was brewing. The day before this confrontation with Jae-hee, something had happened that reminded him of Hanul. He had finally met up with the girl who had slapped him in public not long ago. Before heading to the station, she casually said she had fun and was willing to let things go. This time, he was ready to dump her on the spot, but she unexpectedly asked for a goodbye kiss. Despite the simple request, he froze for a second, suddenly remembering Hanul's awkward face at the laundromat. Replaying the whole scene in his mind, her naive wish that he had teased her about, he couldn't help but laugh. He laughed so hard that he accidentally spat all over his date's face and immediately apologized. She immediately flew into a rage and started pounding on him, cursing him out with all sorts of profanities, but he didn't care if she was angry. So, that random memory of Hanul gave him the idea to go see her. Now, he stood before the young couple with the wash sweater in his hand. The girl decided to play mediator and introduce them, calling Minchul her childhood friend. They didn't even greet each other, and the tense atmosphere between the two was so thick you could cut it with a knife, which overwhelmed her. She stopped Minchul and bluntly asked what he wanted from her. He stalled, looking away with a sly smile on his lips, as if he was thoroughly enjoying all of this. Finally, pretending her friend wasn't even there, he asked if there had to be a reason to see her. What really annoyed him was that his usual tricks didn't work on her, so even now, she just told him bluntly, "Yep, pretty much." He pretended to joke, saying he just came to return the jacket and was going to call. But then he found them. Minchul glanced at the package and saw his jacket, while he just smiled and apologized. He also claimed he had no choice, as Hanul had stripped him in the street, so he had to wear hers. Those words hit him hard, and you could see in his eyes. Despite her attempts to explain, he left, having made a strong impression and forcing her to defend herself. He just casually said he was going to class, and despite her attempts to stop him, it was no use. And so, the childhood friend were left alone to deal with a mess of emotions because of that guy. After getting out of that conversation, Minchul asked her what she was really here for, only to find out she wanted to have lunch together. Even so, she mentally cursed herself for saying that, because she was really just there to, get closer to him. He immediately started thinking about what they could eat, while she was still hung up on the fact that she hadn't seen his face yet. He turned his head in surprise, not understanding why she had suddenly gone quiet, but Hanul was already brewing a new plan. Before he could even ask what she was thinking, she awkwardly touched his face with her finger. The gesture was so stiff and strange that they both froze. In that instant, she felt how inappropriate her touch was and realized she had completely messed up. Minchul wasn't impressed by her little trick either and asked her flat out what she was doing. She definitely hadn't expected that reaction from him. She thought he would yell like he usually did, but instead, he was just uncharacteristically quiet. Hanul froze, desperately trying to figure out why he had such a confused look on his face. All these thoughts made her heart pound, and she remembered Minji saying she might actually like him. The suggestion from her friend annoyed her so much that she jumped up without a second thought. To convince herself it wasn't possible, she blurted out that he was a total jerk. To change the subject, she immediately asked if he had slept well, and then started rambling on and on about her classes. She was so freaked out that she couldn't stop this frantic rambling. Minchul was stunned by her sudden outburst, and all he could say was, "Don't be nervous." The simple advice seemed to confuse her even more and created a whole new level of awkward silence. Eventually, it all devolved into a fight, just like their usual messy dynamic. She tried to get him to let go, saying people would think they were a couple, which was just nonsense. As a result, he told her to let go first, which sparked another argument. They agreed to let go on the count of 3, but that didn't exactly go as planned. Even after that, they still wouldn't release each other, which annoyed him even more. Finally, Hanul managed to free her hand from his hair and pushed him away. After a brief silence, she looked down and suggested they stay away from each other for a while. Minchul was completely taken aback by her suggestion. She then said that even though she had started it all, she was surprised at how quiet he was. She hesitated, but eventually asked him why he could be so calm after everything that had happened between them. Hanul added that after what happened yesterday, they probably wouldn't start dating and she'd rather just be friends. Although she wasn't expecting any romantic developments, she quietly admitted that it was super awkward to be around him now. The words, which laid all her feelings bare, cost her a great deal, and she squeezed her eyes shut. Minchul seemed to get her mixed signals, but had no idea how to break the deadlock. Finally, he stood up, was silent for a moment, and then just said he understood and needed to leave. As he walked away, Hanul flinched, all her worries still hanging in the air. She tried to tell herself it was for the best and that they needed space, but she still felt terrible. Lost in these thoughts, she sadly answered a call from her mom, who immediately assumed she was sick. The girl was caught off guard when her mom reminded her that tomorrow was the day she was supposed to come home. It was mandatory to return, as the next day was the Harvest Festival, which was meant to be celebrated with family. She froze when her mom told her to bring Minchul with her tomorrow, completely unaware of what had happened between them. She turned around, realizing that Minchul would be going home too, and that they might run into each other. The guy whipped around as if he'd been shot when his mom told him he'd better come home tomorrow or else. Despite the terrible atmosphere, they were bound to end up on the same bus. Predictably, after everything that happened just a short while ago, she was dead set against riding together and open the app. She was hoping they could take different buses and was thrilled when she saw there were still some seats left. Hanul immediately thought, hey, even if we're on the same bus, we could just sit at opposite ends. But she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw that the only remaining seats were right next to each other. So there they were, sitting side by side, which added to the already tense situation. Hanul could feel his gaze on her, and she froze, having no idea how to get out of this mess. Minchul was just as overwhelmed by the whole thing, but he decided he had to do something to break the ice. She gave him a wary look when he said he needed to clear up something she seemed to have forgotten. He reminded her that after their unexpected passionate encounter, she had said she would kill him if he dared to breathe a word about it. That was exactly why he had gritted his teeth and pretended nothing had happened. She felt mortified and apologized after he said he was pretending for the sake of avoiding awkwardness. Seeing how down she was after hearing that, he told her he didn't want things to be weird between them either. After several hours, they finally arrived in their hometown, where Hanul's mom was overjoyed to see him. The girl was just as thrilled to see her favorite aunt, whom she adored. It was pretty normal for Minchul's mom to focus all her attention on his girlfriend instead of her own son. Minchul tried to find out where the rest of the family was, but he heard they were all super busy. The next second, Hanul rushed into her mom's arms, saying how much she had missed her. She was surprised when her mom suddenly asked how they felt after drinking so much the other day. Given what had happened between them after that bottle of liquor, they both struggled to act casual. She immediately started insisting they only had a tiny sip and didn't drink more because it tasted awful. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Minchul's mom, who told them to eat first and called for help in the kitchen. Eventually, they finally sat down at the dining table, which was already laden with a huge spread of dishes. Hanul loved her aunts cooking so much that she couldn't hide her excitement at the sight of all that food. Still, it was hard to pretend nothing had happened, which made the food taste bland. Knowing they had to spend the whole day together, she decided to just act like nothing had changed between them. She suddenly jumped up, thinking that if she faked a stomachache, she could slip away and be alone for a bit. She started wolfing down a massive amount of food as if she were from some starving country. It turned out her stomach was much stronger than she thought, and she didn't get the reaction she was hoping for. While Minchul was helping his mom with dessert, Hanul was racking her brain for a new escape plan. As they were cutting fruit together, Hanul's mom decided to ask her if she liked cartoons. From a certain studio, the girl's eyes lit up, saying a new one had just come out yesterday, and then her mom said she had a gift certificate for the cinema. She added that it wasn't her cup of tea, and she'd rather have Minchul go with her while she and his mom went to a cafe. They both froze, knowing it wasn't a good idea given their complicated situation. The woman, oblivious to their relationship, smiled and said it would be more fun if they went together. As usual, Hanul tried to save the situation by trying to invite herself to the cafe instead of the movie. Despite that, the temptation of the new cartoon won out, and she ended up going to the movies with her friend after all. He went to buy popcorn while she sadly muttered to herself, wondering if she was really just a slave to her emotions. Finally, the long-awaited moment arrived, the movie started, and the girl doubted if she'd be able to concentrate. Despite her initial worries, the cartoon completely captured her attention and made her very emotional. Minchul was very skeptical at first, but ended up shedding a tear, which was definitely something he didn't want anyone to see. The cartoon moved Hanul so deeply that she was sobbing her heart out. She glared at her companion when he pointed out that she was 20 years old and still crying over a cartoon. although he tried to deny it. His eyes looked just as watery as hers. They kept bickering until Hanul's gaze fell on a sticker photo booth. Remembering it had been a long time since they'd done that, she dragged him over, saying there was no way he could object to a quick snapshot. He finally gave in and stood next to her while she happily snapped away. Of course, they still managed to argue even then, so the photos perfectly captured their whole vibe. After getting the pictures, Hanul excitedly suggested they go to the arcade. Minchul couldn't refuse such an offer, especially since gaming used to be their main activity. They ended up playing until the evening, having a blast, and she even started playing with some kids. She looked up in surprise at how dark it was, realizing how quickly autumn had arrived. Noticing it wasn't warm outside, she still wanted to have a beer, and Minchul was in complete agreement. The moment they mentioned alcohol, they both remembered the mess they'd made the last time they drank. Agreeing they'd freeze their butts off if they drank, they started hurrying home. The girl was completely caught off guard when a familiar male voice called out to her. They both turned around and saw a guy who looked unusually familiar. He looked them over too, pointing a finger as if he'd finally remembered where he knew them from. The boy and girl were reserved at first, but then they realized it was their old classmate. He was the one who had first made them think there might be something more than friendship between them. They ended up deciding to hang out and went to a restaurant where he pointed out that they were still best friends. At first, Minchul was a bit skeptical about what he was saying, but Hanul decided to go along with it. They realized they hadn't seen each other since high school graduation, which was about 4 years ago. As they were talking, she started cutting her food to make it easier to eat, but Minchul took her plate and cut it for her. Minchul froze when their old classmate asked if they had actually done the deed, taken that step. It seemed Hanul didn't realize he was alluding to the conversation where they swore they'd never fall in love. She froze when he reminded them of their promise to shave their heads, pay the ultimate price if they ever fell for each other. I guess the memory caught her so off guard that she couldn't hide her embarrassment and surprise. The guy was still choking, but his friend just pointed at him and asked what made him think she was ever into him. Remembering she had already changed her vow, she stammered that she had sworn to stay single forever. They immediately cut him off when he commented on the obvious romantic vibe between them. She froze in surprise when he mentioned he had forgotten about the alcohol and suggested they have a drink. Hanul, knowing the effect alcohol had on her, made an excuse that she didn't like the taste. He immediately countered that the restaurant had all sorts of sweet, fruity beers. She had never tried that kind of drink before, which made his suggestion even more tempting. Minchul wanted to stop her, but held back, knowing it would only fuel more speculation about them. She eventually gave in and started enjoying the delicious drink, not realizing she was already on her third glass. She exclaimed out loud how delicious and sweet the drink was, which annoyed Minchul even more. They finally loosened up and started reminiscing about their high school days. So they couldn't help but recall the time they played tug of war, jumped into a fountain, and got a serious scolding. They had just started talking about the tug of war when she remembered getting someone else's blood all over her hands. After that thought, the girl stood up and told them not to tell any fun stories behind her back while she went to the restroom. As she was leaving, the guy asked Minchul if their university's sports season had started yet. However, Minchul was surprised when he assumed he was studying sports. The guy was taken aback when he explained that although he loved sports in high school, he was now in business school. Minchul said grimly that he had given up training back in his first year of high school. He refilled his glass, saying the other guy wouldn't have known since they went to different high schools. He handed him a drink, adding that it was no big deal because he realized that path wasn't for him. The guy looked at his acquaintance in surprise, as he used to be a big deal, and everyone thought he'd become a star. Minchul downed his drink, made a face, and said the soju was trash. It seems the alcohol loosened things up enough for them to decide to go to karaoke, which Hanul was all for. Hanul proudly kicked things off with a new song, making them realize she hadn't changed a bit. The guy started talking about how they grew up listening to their mom's music, which was completely different from what's on the radio now. Hanul didn't seem to care what she was singing, which allowed her to enjoy the moment. She had a huge smile on her face, making the whole scene great. She was so into belting out the cheesy song that the guys across from her couldn't help but laugh. One of their classmates laughed and said her voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Even though Minchul agreed with him, you could tell he was actually touched. It seemed that in that moment, he realized that despite everything, they still had feelings for each other. Hanul was exhausted after that song and didn't even realize she had totally butchered it. She shuffled toward the exit, saying she was going to the vending machine for a cold drink, and asked if we wanted anything. Minchul immediately noticed she had forgotten her jacket, even though it was a bit chilly outside. Our friend thought he was getting up to perform, but he just followed Hanul out. A few minutes later, he found her outside, surprised. She had intended to go to the vending machine, but had changed her mind and was already sitting outside, devouring an ice cream. She explained that she suddenly had a craving for ice cream and blamed it on the alcohol. He ignored her excuse and immediately and carefully put his jacket on her like a mother would. He said she'd catch a cold eating ice cream in this weather and then zipped up her jacket. Minchul zipped it all the way up and thoughtfully asked who would take care of her if he wasn't around. She was stunned to see a hint of genuine concern from him, despite his usual cold demeanor. She felt a crazy impulse and just went for it, catching him completely off guard. He was so shocked by her sudden move that his face flushed red as he stammered, "What are you doing?" It was hard for her to say the real reason, but she admitted she just really wanted to. He had no idea how to respond to her words, but he couldn't deny that he wanted it too. As it turned out, he grabbed her sleeve and pulled her aside so they could finally kiss. All the tension between them just made them want to go back to kissing the way they used to, even though he was more sober than she was. He kissed her so hard he didn't want to stop. She felt the same way, and the alcohol just made everything more intense. Then he finally pulled away, as if just realizing what was happening between them. But she didn't back down, so he went back for more. He had to break the kiss when he felt the ice cream she was holding drip all over his fingers. Surprisingly, this only drew Hanul's attention more, and her eyes immediately locked onto his fingers. He couldn't believe what he was seeing when she confidently grabbed his hand and pulled it to her mouth. Minchul froze, feeling her lick the ice cream off his fingers without a single thought about what she was doing. Coming to his senses, he immediately covered her face with his palm and asked in shock what she was doing. He asked her flat out why she was using her tongue, but she didn't seem to care at all. The next moment, she seemed to remember something and said with a smile that his hands were big. I think Minchul understood the real meaning behind her words, which flustered him even more. She looked at him, confused, as he concluded that she definitely couldn't handle her liquor. He calmly pointed out that she had drunk a lot without thinking and that it wouldn't end well if she kept going. She hesitated, agreeing by resting her head on him thoughtfully, and then asked herself what was wrong with her. The girl closed her eyes and mumbled that she really shouldn't fall for him. Minchul agreed with her and, as usual, went to pat her on the head but pulled his hand back at the last second. After a while, they finally returned to their old classmate, who was starting to think they had disappeared. He apologized for taking so long when the guy mentioned he was already on his 9th song. Then he was surprised to find Hanul wasn't with him, but he explained she just went to the restroom to, sober up. When the guy noticed how red his face was, Minchul tried to blame it on the alcohol. He could feel the guy was getting totally suspicious and asked him straight up why he was staring. The guy first apologized for possibly asking a stupid question and then asked him what he really thought of Hanul. He just tried to hide his feelings, agreeing it was a stupid question and saying she was like family. He felt a pang of guilt, remembering he had just been making out with her against the wall. The guy covered his face and suddenly mumbled that they had done something wrong, as if forgetting he wasn't alone. He said they shouldn't have started anything, but they had given in once again. Their friend was stunned and couldn't say a word, afraid to interrupt the sudden confession. He carefully tried to comfort him, saying there was nothing wrong with his feelings or wanting to be with her. To his surprise, he just replied sadly that all he could do was respect her decision and do what she wanted. It was unbelievable hearing that from the arrogant, stubborn jerk he knew. He got annoyed at his friend's hesitation and snapped at him to just admit his feelings. He softened his tone when he saw how confused his friend was. He sounded incredibly frustrated, going on about how scared he was that she would leave him. Eventually it got late, the kind of late that screams, "Time to go home, folks." And what do you know, Hanul got completely wasted and passed out in the restroom, leaving Minchul to carry her all the way home on his back. He said goodbye to the guy, told him to get home safe, and headed in the opposite direction. He just stood there, lost in thought, trying to process everything he had learned from being with his old friends tonight. He figured they definitely had feelings for each other, but they were either clueless or deliberately keeping a secret. Still, he knew it was probably a lot more complicated since they had been friends their whole lives. The next day, Hanul was woken up by the desperate meowing of her cat. She groaned, feeling that killer hangover headache pounding in her head. She tried to beg the cat to get off her stomach because she felt like she was going to throw up, but it was no use. A few minutes later, she finally stumbled out of her room, where her mom greeted her with a smile. The girl took a glass of warm water from her and tiredly asked how she got home last night. She was completely stunned when she heard that Minchul had carried her home because she'd had a bit too much to drink. The news was like a shot of adrenaline, and she immediately grabbed her phone to text a guy. She repeated what her mom had said in the message, and then he asked if she remembered anything from the night before. The girl pretended she forgot everything after singing one song, but he just said she hadn't done anything out of line. After thanking him for getting her home safe, she wished him a happy holiday and said she'd see him at school. She threw her phone on the bed, exhaustedly realizing she remembered everything, including the fact that they had made out again while tipsy. She knew this would only make everything between them even more complicated. What struck her as odd was that despite letting herself do all those things, she was acting completely normal in real life and on social media. She was frustrated and lost in thought, trying to figure out what to do and whether their relationship could even be considered a friendship anymore. It seemed Minchul felt the same way and was just as confused about what was happening between them. Stumbling upon a childhood photo of them, he realized she had always been like that, always chasing after whatever caught her eye. He was pretty sure that even now, it was just pure curiosity driving her to learn more about physical intimacy and things like that. The guy was frustrated, realizing that once things cooled down, everything would go back to normal because he knew her better than anyone. He sneered, thinking she would eventually apologize awkwardly and say she didn't know what she was thinking. Minchul rubbed his head tiredly, tormented by the fact that he had feelings for her but didn't want to lose her. His face completely fell as it was getting harder and harder to keep up the pretense. The next day, Hanul went to university as if nothing had happened and met up with the usual group of students. They were all getting ready for the upcoming basketball tournament, and Minji decided to give her a new hairstyle for the occasion. She even helped fix the hair of Lee Yohan from the school's basketball team. After the girls wished him luck, he just casually mentioned that they'd had a good run lately. Their department had made it to the finals for the first time ever, so everyone was thrilled. A little later, the girls made their way to the stands, ready to enjoy the game. They were completely shocked by the number of people there. It was as if the entire student body had shown up. The place was packed, with people sitting on the floor just to get a glimpse of the game. Hanul wondered if basketball games were always this popular and asked who they were playing against. They froze when they heard their opponent was the business school. Okay, that explained the crowd, because it was a showdown between the two campus heartthrobs. Despite having strong players, Lee Yohan thought they would still lose even though they made it to the finals. Jae-hee, with a big smile, asked if he was planning to go out there like that, saying he had mistaken him for an idol. He turned around thoughtfully, adding that they'd see who would have a last laugh. On top of that, he gave Minchul a good look when he heard he was good at basketball. He must have felt their gazes when Jae-hee said they had a chance to win, because he turned around with a tough expression. Meanwhile, the girls were already thinking glumly about how badly they were going to lose, having clearly lost all their fighting spirit. Minji noticed her friend was silent, just staring intently ahead. She was startled when the girl asked if she really couldn't decide which team to root for. Hanul crossed her hands in front of her face again, hoping everything would go well and no one would get hurt. A little later, the game was heating up and Minchul was showing off his skills as usual. He was about to make a dunk when Jae-hee, whom he couldn't stand, suddenly appeared in front of him. Minchul told him to move with a blank face, which made the guy laugh. He couldn't help but chuckle at how polite the guy was being, telling him not to be so formal. Minchul shot him a death glare when he asked how long he and Hanul had been friends. Jae-hee was practically begging for attention, asking him to spill everything he knew about her from all these years. He met his gaze and asked him straight up if he was really interested in her. His face twisted for a second, and then he smirked and said, "Yeah, I guess so." To his surprise, Minchul seemed even more pissed off after that and moved toward the basket. As it turned out, he took advantage of Jae-hee's hesitation and shot the ball straight into the hoop. His move was so precise and skilled that the guy was mesmerized. He completely forgot which team he was on and just stood there, amazed that he had sunk a three-pointer. Minchul thought coldly that if he wanted to provoke him, he'd have to come up with something more creative. He just smiled, agreeing that it didn't work, and then heard Yohan say he wasn't expecting much anyway. In the end, the visual design department suffered a crushing defeat by a whopping 46 points which bummed everyone out. The students were down about the loss, and to make matters worse, their women's dodgeball team didn't even make it through the qualifiers. During all this, Hanul was just focused on stuffing her face, which surprised her friends, who were starting to think food was the only thing she cared about. They happened to spot their senior, Jae, and immediately swarmed him, since he didn't usually attend these kinds of events. Hanul suggested they say hi when he was free and head to the pretzel truck first. Meanwhile, Jae was staring tiredly at the ground while other students kept trying to talk to him. Something made him look up, and that's when he caught a glimpse of Hanul in the distance, whom everyone around found hilarious as she stuffed her face like a little hamster, as if nothing else mattered. Just then, Jae recalled the intense look in his eyes when they were talking about Minchul's girl earlier, and then how, after they had gorged themselves, she had surprised everyone by suggesting they go to a cafe. They were all baffled when Lee Yohan suggested they go back to watch the basketball game, and Hanul disliked the idea because it meant she would have to keep watching Minchul again. She nearly choked when their friend Haesu called to say her friend had gotten into some legal trouble, and not long before all this happened, Minchul had run into Jae by chance. The Sunbae was just chilling, greeting his rival in his usual way, the same guy he had been trying to provoke just a little while ago. And even though the guy had acted like a jerk, he was all smiles after Jae, Sunbae, asked if he was serious back then. Seeing that he didn't get it, he decided to ask again if he was really interested in Hanul. At first, Jae acted cool, but then he finally said with a sly grin that she was cute enough. Minchul froze when he asked the loaded question of whether that was why he was so obsessed with her. The question came so suddenly and forcefully that all possible answers vanished from his mind. After a few long seconds, he finally understood what he meant and asked what he was implying. It seemed Jae got the reaction he wanted and quickly said he was just talking to himself. In the end, he left in a hurry, wishing him luck in the next game without giving him a chance to say anything. As if on cue, Minchul's friend distracted him, suggesting they grab a bite while they had the chance. He could tell his friend was in a bad mood, so he tried to ignore it. When Minchul heard the final match was against the physical education department, he started to think seriously. Eventually, they found a secluded, shady spot to relax and have some snacks during their free time. The guy added that while he was actively looking for him, people were already placing bets on who would win. Opinions were divided because on one hand, Minchul had the skills, but the other team had a big reputation. The problem was Minchul thought sports were a waste of time and saw nothing to look forward to besides winning. His friend completely froze when he heard the other team's voices from the other side of the wall. He hesitated when he heard them say they only wanted to win, but he still supported Minchul. A big guy from the other team was roaring by the table about how insulting it was to be compared to the business administration team. What he said was so intense that Minchul's classmate couldn't help but slide down the wall. Meanwhile, the opponents were talking about Minchul's skills, as he was indeed good at basketball. His teammate, Sung Yun, agreed, saying their main rival was just an amateur. Upon hearing that familiar voice, Minchul's ears perked up as if he had heard it somewhere before. He felt they were just being as arrogant as ever, thinking that being tall naturally made them good players. Sancho directly asked who this guy even was and why he was so popular with his looks. Minchul's friend wanted him to move, but he seemed to be enjoying listening to them talk about him. Meanwhile, the muscular guy kept bashing the guy, saying it was because of people like him that they were all single and couldn't get girlfriends. When a third person casually mentioned the blind date, Sung Yun froze. He had been on one recently, and he agreed with a smirk that the girl he hit on was indeed a beauty. Minchul froze when he said it was Kim Minchul's childhood friend. They were talking about the overheard conversation when his classmate chimed in that she was very popular, so it wasn't surprising she was surrounded that night. Before he could ask anything, they were shocked to hear someone ask if she really had that great of a body. At first, the big guy didn't understand what they meant, but another person explained that Hanul was famous for her hot body. Minchul completely froze as they went on about how her figure was still impressive even when she was all covered up. So Sung Hyun was saying that he had tricked her into coming to his house a few days ago by pretending they were going to study together. He thought she was either too naive or just plain stupid to fall for it, but then she ran away. He was mad at first, but then he let it go. Just then, Minchul chimed in that she wasn't even hot enough to bother with, and seemed easy anyway. The moment his classmate saw him walking slowly and menacingly toward them, he knew they were done for. When the guy saw who was actually walking toward them, they were instantly stunned. Sung-hyun obviously had no idea what was happening as his back was turned. Before he could react, Minchul had already grabbed him by the shirt, glaring at him like a demon. Sung-hyun tried to stop him, only to get a punch to the face, which basically set the whole thing off. Hanul was terrified when she heard the news and dashed to the police station. She couldn't imagine why he would be at a police station and just assumed someone had beaten him up. While still on the phone, she heard that the guy from her blind date, Lim Sung-hyun, was also involved in the mess. She also said she'd heard from some business administration students that Sung-hyun had been talking trash about her. After learning that Minchul had beaten him up for making a move on her, she rushed to the police station and burst in. Her friend, who had minor bruises on his face, was completely stunned to see her storm into the police station like that. The moment she saw the small scratches and bruises on his face, she cupped his head in her hands, completely worried. She yelled at him loudly, asking why he didn't fight back, to the point where the police had to tell her to quiet down. To her surprise, he pointed in another direction, where a person she absolutely did not expect to see was sitting, a battered and bruised Sung-hyun. His face was a complete mess. In an instant, Hanul realized she had completely misunderstood the situation and froze. Afterward, a long, awkward silence that made Hanul uncomfortable fell over the room. She stunned everyone by asking the police if they could leave, since it was a mutual fight and they had reconciled. An incensed Sung-hyun immediately protested, saying he was the one who got beaten up and someone had to pay. The moment he mentioned pressing charges, Hanul raised her hand. The next second, she smacked him on the back of the head, making him bite his tongue. Baffled by her sudden action, he couldn't help but show a surprised expression. It seemed his look of surprise didn't stop her, as a new round of beatings rained down on him. Sung-hyun tried to demand an explanation, but she snapped back that if he had any shame, he wouldn't have brought it up at all. The guy recoiled in shock when he heard that she already knew about all the trash he'd been talking about her. Hanul told him to listen up, saying that if he went to court, she would countersue him for misconduct. Sung-hyun knew her threat wasn't empty, so he immediately dropped his gaze to the floor. Without another word, she grabbed Minchul's shirt, accusing him of being all talk before, but silent now. A few minutes later, they were outside, and Hanul was carefully applying a bandage to his wound. Even though Minchul had stood up for his friend's honor, he still felt terrible. She kept nagging him, saying he still hadn't learned to control his fiery temper. To her surprise, he only asked if she was really mad that they just walked out of the police station like that. Hanul calmly replied that she would only seriously consider pressing charges if he kept causing trouble. In the end, she declared that she wanted nothing more to do with him and didn't even want to think about someone like him anymore. The girl added that, having learned her lesson, she was glad there was nothing between them and that she had already told him everything she needed to. She berated him for getting so worked up over something so stupid. After she said all this, Hanul demanded to know what they were supposed to do now if rumors started to spread, but he didn't want to hear it all. She couldn't believe he genuinely didn't care what other people thought. Imagine her surprise when he blurted out that she was more important than all of those people. Hanul was left completely speechless by his words. In that moment, she suddenly understood how a person could abruptly become an indispensable part of someone else's life. She just kept gazing at her childhood friend, feeling a new affection blooming in her heart. Even though she had always thought of him as family, for some reason, she had never felt this way about him until now. She knew he wasn't related to her by blood, but out of everyone in the world, she had chosen him. She was so lost in this thought that she didn't even notice his hand reaching out to her. Minchul could tell she was acting strangely and tried to figure out why she had frozen up. She was so stunned by her own sudden feelings for him that she didn't even realize she was blushing furiously. The next day, Hanul's mind was still reeling, wondering if she had actually fallen for Kim Minchul. The idea seemed so wrong and impossible that she stared at herself, thinking she might be imagining things. But then she remembered the look on his face when he talked about how important she was to him, and she immediately blushed, realizing it was true. A storm of feelings for her old friend churned inside her, and she let out a pained groan, sliding down to the bathroom floor. She couldn't understand how she could suddenly see him as a man, someone she had practically considered a brother all this time. Part of her liked thinking of Minchul this way, but another part was secretly judging herself for it. She stood up and tried to compose herself, but then, the thought of getting closer to him popped in her head. She twirled in front of the mirror, thinking that since things had progressed that far between them, he must be interested in her body, right? Unbeknownst to her, door. Minji jumped in fright when she heard a loud thud from the bathroom where Hanul was. She rushed over, thinking something terrible had happened, only to find her friend acting all sorts of weird. You can't imagine her expression when Hanul, sitting on the floor, suddenly choked out a plea for help. Basically, she needed help putting together the right look, so they made a beeline for a clothing store. Minji had great taste and a keen eye, so she was able to put together all sorts of amazing outfits. Hanul was completely blown away by her friend's fashion sense, unable to hide the look of pure amazement on her face. Glancing at the price tags, she couldn't help but think that she had spent almost all her savings on just these two items. She immediately thought about getting a side job, while Minji pressed her on why exactly she needed a shopping spree. The girl didn't want to say the real reason, so she made up an excuse that winter was coming and she needed to prepare her winter clothes. I guess her friend knew she was trying to bluff her way through it, but didn't know the whole truth, even though she was sure it had something to do with Minchul. Eventually, they finished shopping, and Hanul began to examine her new look in the mirror. The new clothes felt much more revealing than the jeans she usually wore, which made her start to doubt her choice. She worried the skirt was too short. Besides that, she suddenly wanted to ask Minchul out to eat, but it felt like an impossible task. She couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, especially since they used to have lunch together every day and she'd never been this nervous. Just then, her phone suddenly lit up with a call from Minchul's mom. She finally calmed down, and before she could even process it, she was already dashing to his house after receiving a dinner invitation. She felt like it might look like she was trying too hard, but she was secretly glad she didn't have to text him herself. His mom said she was in the neighborhood and just wanted to drop by with some snacks. Then she started complaining about her son, saying he couldn't even be bothered to answer his phone. Just as she started nagging about Minchul not picking up, he walked through the door looking exhausted. He was completely speechless with shock to see Hanul chilling with his mom. His mom immediately started scolding him, asking if he was too busy to even answer a call. Minchul frowned and moved to help her, but Hanul decided to ask him why he couldn't give her a straight answer. To her surprise, he froze beside her and said he would tell her the real reason he'd been so busy. After a moment, he leaned in and whispered in her ear that he would explain everything after his mom left. Getting nervous, Hanul agreed, but she immediately panicked when he leaned in with his face so close. A little while later, his mom took her leave after finishing all the snacks she had promised to make. The girl tried to convince her to stay a bit longer, but she already had plans to see a movie with her own mom. As she was leaving, she added that she had left something interesting in the bedroom and suggested they go check it out. She claimed she found it while cleaning and then left them alone, closing the door behind her. They immediately went upstairs to the room, where they saw a ton of old photos of them together from their childhood. Hanul was thrilled by the sheer number of photos she had completely forgotten about, guessing that Minchul's grandmother probably saved them when she was alive. She suggested he look at a photo she was holding. In it, they were in swimsuits, and she was crying because they were supposed to go to the beach, but ended up at a valley instead. They also stumbled upon a photo from an elementary school field trip when they were in different classes. They even had a picture from their second year of high school, when Minchul's hair was much shorter. The girl immediately felt defeated as soon as he found an unflattering picture of her. She lay on the bed, thoughtfully, saying it was strange how he remembered everything so clearly after all this time. The girl couldn't help but recall her friend Minji, saying that the reason she knew so much about fashion was because she was interested in it. With these thoughts, she suddenly looked at Minchul, who was smiling as he looked at their shared photos. He must have felt her gaze, as she was thinking that the more she looked at him, the more she felt she needed him. She hid her embarrassed face, wondering what the chances were that he felt the same way about her as she did about him. Hanul was so lost in her thoughts that she jumped when he asked if she was hurting somewhere. Instead of answering, she immediately got hung up on why he was looking at her like that, and whether he had always been this way. Feeling like she couldn't hold back any longer, she suddenly leaned in, grabbed his shirt, and kissed him. She concluded she must be crazy, as this was the first time they had kissed while sober, which meant she couldn't get a good read on him. The girl couldn't help but want to see what his face looked like when they kissed. To her surprise, she saw for the first time just how much he would blush when she kissed him. A tense silence fell between them, and she couldn't help but blush herself when she realized what she had just done. The next moment, she closed the distance to Minchul again and kissed him, seeing that he clearly wasn't against it. They kept pulling apart to gaze into each other's eyes before kissing passionately again. It seemed both of them had wanted to kiss for a long time, but just couldn't work up the courage to make the first move. Even with all these feelings rushing back, Minchul couldn't help but wonder why she suddenly wanted to kiss him. The question bothered him so much that he actually managed to pull back and ask her to slow down, but she wouldn't and moved in again. But he held firm. Part of him was stunned by her forwardness and found it hard to resist, but another part needed to know the answer. He was clearly flustered when he asked if she was really sure she wanted to do this. Her eyes immediately lit up after that question, making it very clear that she was more than willing. Minchul was stunned by her sudden frankness, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He suddenly asked if she was doing all this just out of curiosity or if there was another reason. He hung his head in frustration when she thoughtfully said he had guessed right. Minchul suddenly grabbed her hand and suggested they just stick to kissing for tonight. He said he just didn't want things to get awkward between them again, but he still couldn't admit that he didn't want them to grow apart. It seemed Hanul completely missed his point and was excited, thinking he wasn't saying he didn't want to. Minchul froze, realizing he had completely failed to get his point across. He was stunned when she suddenly grabbed his hand and pressed it against her chest. Surprised by his reaction, she blushed and asked him point blank if he didn't like it. The boy looked at the frustrated girl, but still couldn't admit that he absolutely loved it. After a moment, they finally crossed the line and ended up in his room, with Hanul already sitting between his legs. They quickly shed their clothes and got down to business. It felt amazing for both of them. Minchul was stunned by the sight before him, unable to hide his embarrassment and awe. The girl was struggling, realizing she was far from the finish line, which reminded her of something similar. Hanul was stunned by how much harder this was than last time, until Minchul dropped a surprising truth bomb. Hearing that he hadn't gone all the way last time, she immediately realized she hadn't heard any moans like in the movies. The sudden realization hit her so hard that for a moment she thought she was done for. Minchul tried to help her relax, and he was a little surprised when she asked him to kiss her. Even so, her request unlocked a whole new level of feeling inside him. In any case, he couldn't and didn't want to resist the impulse inside him, so he kissed her right then and there. The kiss did help Hanul relax and get some good feelings out of what was happening. Minchul trembled as he felt the extreme pleasure triggered by everything she was doing. Even though his mind was filled with new sensations, he still remembered to be considerate of Hanul's feelings. The final push was tough for her, but she eventually managed to let go, feeling the pain turn into pleasure. They ended up exploring this new connection for a long time until they both fell asleep, exhausted. After a while, she woke up to find herself alone in bed. She slowly sat up, feeling a bit sore from the previous night. Even though she was still groggy, she could smell food in the air. That was enough to get her out of bed and into the kitchen, where Minchul was working his magic. He looked at her calmly and asked if she wanted some ramen. The sleepy-eyed Hanul was too much of a foodie to resist the tempting offer. A few minutes later, a steaming, fragrant pot of freshly cooked ramen was placed in front of her. Minchul, looking much more awake than his girl, handed her a hair tie. Hanul took it without a word and immediately tied up her hair, signaling she was ready to eat. They finally started their breakfast, but she zoned out again when she saw how handsome her friend looked at that moment. She felt a bit strange, like she was suddenly hit by a wave of admiration for her crush. Still, she tried to act casual and started eating, wondering what he felt about her. She decided to change the subject and asked why he hadn't answered his mom's call since he said he would explain. He told her that the department head had chewed him out for their basketball team, losing, and for him ending up at the police station. Hanul was clearly surprised by the reason, saying it was stupid, and Minchul agreed. On another note, she pointed out something in his house and told him he should get fixed. She was surprised when he said that even without something for her to fix, he had to save money this month because he'd been working. Minchul admitted he was saving the money he earned, but wasn't ready to say what he was saving it for. Hanul immediately started mimicking him, trying to get an answer, but he didn't give her what she wanted. Besides, talking about work reminded her that she really needed to find a side job. She remembered that Minchul's birthday was in December, and she wanted to save up to buy him a great gift. I guess she was so excited by the idea that she couldn't help but get thrilled about her new plan. Minchul looked on, a bit confused, as a million emotions flashed across her face like a shapeshifter, and asked her what was wrong. With a knowing smile, Hanul dropped a bombshell, saying she was going to get a part-time job, which took him by surprise. She figured he would freak out if she just came out with her feelings, so she decided to start flirting with him bit by bit. She thought it was a stroke of genius, because she could get him used to it, and then, bam, present the birthday gift. Hanul wasted no time, and within a week, she had landed her first job as a barista's assistant at a coffee shop. Despite her efforts to be friendly, her new coworker didn't take to her at all and made it very obvious. The girl moved closer, studying her face, trying to remember where she had seen her before. That same night, she was staying over at Minchul's place and was already fast asleep in his bed when he tucked her in. He chuckled at the sight of her snoring and gently brushed her hair away from her face so as not to wake her. As his gaze traveled down, he noticed the bracelet she always wore, which covered Scar. This detail immediately changed his mood, making him pensive and sad, as if he knew how she got that scar. Lost in those unsettling thoughts and memories, he sat by the bed until dawn, not daring to lie down beside her. That same night, Jae-hee-sunbae was busy with other things, stepping outside for a breath of fresh air between tasks. He took another drag and told the person on the phone that he was currently busy with his own personal pursuits. With that, he said with a smirk that he had to get back to it, keeping the nature of his pursuit a secret. Back in the hotel, he added that his companion was waiting for him and to say hi to his mom for him. Despite his companion's poor state, his movements were unhurried and composed, as if nothing had happened. He walked over to the bed and asked her how she was feeling, as if not noticing the tears streaming down her face. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice, but it seemed her reaction only gave him a more genuine thrill. At first, she spoke weakly and indistinctly. He told her to repeat herself, and then heard her request again for him to take off his mask. The moment he took off the mask, she immediately gave him a tired and displeased look. She mimicked his question, resentfully replying that her face was a mess, after which he complimented her on her patience. Feeling the ropes no longer binding her body, the girl immediately embraced him, demanding a reward for her compliance. Jae-hee-sunbae couldn't refuse such a request and instantly kissed her, grabbing her by the neck. He rarely kissed her, and only as some sort of reward. So this time he seized the moment, pulling away with a final bite on her lip. They both enjoyed the game they were playing, so he calmly lifted her legs onto his shoulders and ordered her to relax. Even as she felt all of it, she wasn't ready for him to get so intense and begged him to slow down, but he just wiped away her tears. Jae had some unique tastes and got a kick out of seeing her like this. After a while, they finished and separated to take a much-needed shower. The girl returned to bed and saw him texting someone, asking what he was doing. She immediately peeked at his phone and saw he was texting a girl named Hanul. Although the conversation seemed harmless, it still bothered her that he had time to reply to another girl even after what they had just done. She confronted him about how often he talked to her and noticed how quickly he pulled his phone away. Even though they weren't in a relationship, she jealously asked if he had already found someone new. Jae acted like it was no big deal, saying it wasn't like that since the girl was just a student from his university and much younger than him. He decided to change the subject, saying with a smirk that her eyes were a bit swollen from crying. Even though she hated that trick, she felt a little better knowing that he cared. Afterwards, she got under the covers and told him not to pretend he cared about her crying face. Hearing that, otherwise he wouldn't keep making her cry. He thoughtfully said that he was indeed affected by her tears. After saying that, he immediately remembered her tear-streaked face when he had just returned to the hotel, and before he could stop himself, he instantly pictured Hanul in her place. The expression on her face looked a bit scary when the man who was appearing in her mind more and more often calmly said that he even liked them. This was exactly why she gave Hanul a death stare when she arrived at the workplace. The girl didn't understand why she was angry and politely introduced herself, saying that she would be working with her from now on. It seemed her sweet smile and polite tone didn't win her colleague's favor, because what she was thinking in her heart was something else entirely. When she finally realized this was the girl her crush had been texting, Her gaze turned grim. Finally, she turned around and told her to ask if she didn't understand anything. Despite her rude attitude, it was clear her knowledge was quite limited. Hanul, however, was captivated by her beauty and elegance. Like a cat. However, she was also puzzled as to why the other girl looked so familiar. After a while, customers started to trickle in, and Hanul kept making mistakes, getting scolded each time. She even almost burned food in the oven that only needed to be heated. The girl's first day was a complete disaster, and she made an iced coffee that was basically poison. It seemed her colleague had reached her limit as she directly accused Hanul of being incompetent. Hanul lowered her head, honestly admitting it was her first job and apologizing for messing things up. Despite her prejudice against the girl, she listened when Hanul promised to learn everything as quickly as possible. Hanul flinched when she kept scolding her, saying she was just some random hire. As if arranged by fate, she happened to look up at that exact moment, saw her side profile, and had a sudden realization. She suddenly realized her colleague looked exactly like the girl who had slapped Jay, Sunbae. She let out a huge, excited shriek, so loud that it made the other girl jump. The brown-haired girl looked completely stunned, not expecting to be recognized as the one who had taught Jae-hee a lesson. Sunbae. Finally, Hanul smiled and asked if she was Jae-hee's girlfriend. Even though the man had made it clear nothing would come of it between them, it still felt good to hear someone think they looked like a couple. Her predicament seemed to confuse Hanul, as she didn't understand their complicated relationship. She immediately asked awkwardly if she had misunderstood, which made the other girl withdraw even more. Admitting they weren't a couple was painful, so she started to stammer, leading Hanul to think they were just in the flirting stage. The girl was deflated because they were long past that stage, but still weren't an actual couple. You could see the sadness appear in Hanul's eyes as she realized her colleague was caught in a one-sided love. She couldn't help but feel a strong sense of kinship with the girl. She grabbed her hands, knowing they were in the same boat. With a determined glint in her eyes, she said that things would work out for her. These words left the other girl even more shocked by this sudden enthusiasm, unable to figure out what was wrong with Hanul and why she was acting this way. She didn't understand how Hanul could smile as if nothing had happened after she had been giving her such a hard time. In the end, she took a step back and told her to get back to work just as a large crowd of customers flooded in. After that wave of customers, they felt completely exhausted and drained. Mahi was surprised to find that Hanul still looked energetic and remembered that she was only 20 years old. The girl decided to take the opportunity to ask what her goal was for working a part-time job like this. Hanul shyly replied that she wanted to buy something, but didn't say what it was, feeling embarrassed. Blushing beet red, she admitted that there was a guy she liked, and she wanted to buy him a gift. The other girl rolled her eyes, thinking the idea was quite naive, and decided not to shatter her fantasy. After hearing that 20 is a good age to start dating, Hanul awkwardly mumbled that they weren't even dating yet, awkwardly scratching the back of her neck. Hanul said that they had been friends since they were little, and she had never thought of him that way before. She finally admitted that she had only recently started seeing him as a man, which made Mahi burst out laughing. The girl froze when Hanul asked how she knew Jae-hee, since they went to different universities. She explained that they had met at a party at a mutual friend's house. Even back then, he had made it clear that he didn't want a serious relationship, but she still held on to her hopes and feelings. And so, they became friends with benefits, which made her feel even more awkward compared to Lee Hanul. She abruptly stood up, saying it was much easier to date someone who was a friend first, and asked about their friendship. Hanul immediately said they had been friends since birth, which clearly surprised the other girl. As she wiped the table, she said that childhood friends are really rare these days, and that she truly admired her situation. She immediately guessed that with such a long friendship, it would probably be really hard for them to start dating. Seeing Hanul look at her sadly, she explained that you never know what might happen. She told her a story about a childhood friend who lived next door and how they always played together. Wringing out a wet cloth, she added that a long time had passed since then, and she didn't even know what he looked like now. That was how she explained the true meaning behind her words to Hanul. Then, a group of students burst noisily into the cafe. It turned out to be Hanul's own friends coming to support their girl. The girl was pleasantly surprised that her friend hadn't forgotten her and had come to show their support and concern. She ran to them, and her friends asked why she was working so far from the university. Her colleague immediately noticed how noisy they were and went over to check on them. Hanul smiled, saying she had only been working there for 2 weeks, so they shouldn't expect any freebies as friends. They could hardly believe their ears when the staff member said the manager actually allowed them to treat friends who visited. While Hanul was picking out a cake for her friends, her colleague started taking care of other customers. A guy tried to hit on her, thinking it was original to ask if they had met before, but she wasn't having any of it and immediately shut him down for using such a cliché pickup line. After being rejected, he walked away laughing, telling everyone he got shot down. When she asked the last guy in the group for his order, he just froze, staring intently at her face, which greatly surprised her. Seeing an opportunity to tease him, she asked if he wanted to come up with a pickup line too. He immediately backed off, muttering that he was just looking at the menu. A blush crept on her cheeks when he coolly asked if she thought she was all that. Realizing she'd been put in her place, she immediately looked down at the screen to take his order for a strawberry smoothie. After hearing from Hanul that the guy with the ponytail was a good person, they started preparing the order. The girl proudly handed them the tray, saying she had made his strawberry smoothie. Everyone was surprised when Minji suddenly asked Hanul if she had received the group chat invitation. She explained that they were planning a high school reunion for the end of the school year, which Hanul apparently knew nothing about. Hanul had been so focused on her passion and her work that she hadn't even noticed the invitation on her phone. Meanwhile, Minchul was at university when his friend called out to him. He asked him directly if he and Hanul weren't on speaking terms anymore, since he hardly ever saw them together. He calmly replied that she was very busy with a part-time job at a cafe, something he wasn't too happy about. Seeing him nervously shaking his leg, his friend guessed that he was worried about Hanul like a true guardian. He immediately started rambling about how she might break some equipment in the cafe, shatter things, or get hurt. He was startled out of his jumble of thoughts by the buzz of his phone. It was a message notification. As soon as he picked up his phone, he stumbled upon a group chat dedicated to the alumni reunion. His old acquaintance, Kim Chu-sin, was asking if he would come to the party, saying everyone really wanted to see him. Meanwhile, they weren't the only ones who had found out about the event and were making their own plans. A girl was thoughtfully browsing the accounts of her former classmates when she happened upon Hanul. She had always been jealous of Hanul and their friendship, and had her own designs on Minchul, whose photo she was now greedily staring at. It seemed a new, wicked plan was forming in her mind right then, one she would put into action to drive them apart. Later, the next day, Minchul headed to the train station where Hanul had invited him. The girl nearly shrieked when she saw her friend, but when she tried to talk to him as usual, he completely ignored her. He almost burst out laughing at her ridiculous display, but she immediately snapped that his reaction was making her angry. After saying that, she froze, uncertainly showing off her new look, which she would normally be too shy to wear. She tried to change the subject by pointing out that he was early as usual, even though she herself was right on time. Ultimately, Minchul just calmly turned and started walking as he heard the train approaching. Although Hanul followed him, she still felt dejected, as if he hadn't noticed her new dress at all. She was visibly upset by his lack of reaction, especially after putting so much thought into what to wear, unaware that it was the very thing on his mind. A few minutes later, they finally got on the train, and the guy stood at a distance keeping his space. It seemed Hanul had already forgotten what was bothering her and was humming a tune in her head. Minchul gazed out the window, and seeing her lost in thought, he followed her gaze outside. Finally, he decided to break the awkward silence and asked how her part-time job at the cafe was going. She immediately got defensive when he asked if she had broken anything at work and if everything was really as good as she claimed. The girl immediately recoiled, saying she hadn't broken anything, but omitting the part about burning a few dishes. Minchul frowned when she said something had happened at their cafe recently and asked if he knew Yoan. She sounded lost as she said he was a Christian, not a Taoist priest as Minchul had called him because of his gray clothes. The girl explained that he had recently come to their cafe and immediately walked up to her colleague, Sister Mihi. At that moment, she had no idea that he was the childhood friend who had a crush on her for so many years. He looked at the girl intently, and she frantically wondered how he knew her real name. In that instant, some kind of revelation seemed to flash through her mind, making her immediately place her hand on his forehead. After that, she saw the scar on his eyebrow, which he had always hidden with his bangs, and then everything finally clicked. Putting all the clues together, she immediately recognized him as that Yoan. the one she hadn't seen in so many years. Hanul watched everything closely, as even she didn't know what had happened between them. Meanwhile, Mihi started to notice how much he had grown, as if she still couldn't believe it was really him. It seemed Johan was just as surprised, frozen as he silently tried to process it all. To her surprise, he hugged her so tightly that she couldn't move in his arms. She was startled by the sudden, intimate gesture, and her face immediately turned bright red. Mihi tried her best to push him away, telling him to wait a minute, but he didn't listen. Afterwards, Johan just held her even tighter, as if afraid to let go and lose her again, just like when they were kids. Her face turned even redder when he softly mumbled that he had missed her like crazy. With sparkling eyes, Hanul recounted all the details of the old friend's reunion to Minchul. She kept asking him if it wasn't magical, but the guy was completely indifferent to what had happened. Hanul was so excited telling him about it that she almost missed the crowd of people flooding onto the platform. They poured into the train so quickly that she ended up pressed tightly against her companion. She was so close to him that she didn't even realize they were both blushing. Hanul couldn't help but remember her friend's advice about physical contact and looked up to see if he was okay with it too. Unfortunately for her, Minchul's face was a complete blank, showing no hint of what he was feeling. She felt frustrated, not even knowing that he was mentally reciting some long story to distract himself. Finally, after a few long minutes, they arrived at the place they had planned to go. The choice of location surprised Minchul, since they always went to a plain old comic cafe. Not wanting to reveal the real reason, Hanul just told him she heard the food there was really good. So here's the thing, there were small, cave-like rooms there where she planned to, get close to the guy. She was fully convinced that when people are squeezed into a small space, the atmosphere heats up. What she didn't expect was that the tall Minchul was too big to even fit into the damn room. They ended up just hanging out at a table, much to Hanul's frustration, feeling her whole plan was ruined. Hearing the buzzer, the guy went to get their order and came back with a whole tray of fragrant food. The girl was so stunned by all the delicious food that she accidentally dropped her spoon, which rolled far away. Minchul muttered that she could have thrown it all the way to the kitchen, but still got up to get it. She apologized, but he just casually bent down, saying he'd get a new one. She was surprised when he suddenly flinched and walked away without a word. Once he was sure she couldn't see, he clutched his head and cursed himself because she had forgotten to wear safety shorts, and he had caught a glimpse of her, Meanwhile, Johan was back at the cafe, completely focused on the girl he had a crush on. Even though they were old friends, Mihi still felt all sorts of awkward with him staring at her like that. Finally, she turned around, ready to give him a piece of her mind for acting so weird. He looked genuinely surprised when she told him that Hanul only worked on Fridays and Saturdays. But she was the one left stunned when he blurted out that he was there to see her. Mihi took the opportunity to call him out on how bold he'd become, staring at her like that. Hearing him practically beg for a break, she asked if he really liked her that much. To her surprise, he just said, cool as a cucumber, that he did, in fact, like her a lot. She immediately got flustered, while he realized he hadn't really explained himself properly. The next thing she knew, Johan was gently holding her fingers, as if trying to show her all his feelings. Her face turned even redder when he said again, without a doubt, that he liked her. Meanwhile, Hanul was already looking forward to digging in while Minchul went to replace the spoon. She was clearly surprised when he came back with a blanket and handed it to her, saying it was a bit chilly. As she thanked him for being so thoughtful, the guy was secretly pleased with her cluelessness. After a while, they finally finished the food and started reading the pile of comics they had picked out earlier. Minchul suddenly saw Hanul's emotions changing wildly with all the plot twists. He found it incredibly amusing how invested she was in these fictional characters. Realizing she needed to wash her face from all the crying, she headed to the restroom. Sitting in the stall, the girl finally realized she had forgotten to wear her safety shorts, and a thought immediately struck her. She figured the reason Minchul had run off so quickly to get a new spoon was because he had accidentally seen her underwear under the table. A few minutes later, she awkwardly made her way back, carefully crawling onto the sofa to avoid exposing herself. Back at the table, she started wondering why he had brought her a blanket in the first place, so she could cover herself. She just couldn't figure out why he would do that, and the possible reason made her blush. Hanul decided to get his attention somehow, touching his foot with hers, which really took him by surprise. He immediately asked why she was doing that, but she didn't give him a straight answer. She kept messing around, pestering his foot until he decided to pinch her toes hard. This was so painful for Hanul that she trembled on the floor for a moment, clutching her ankle. She glared at the guy, saying the fight was completely unfair given the size of his feet. Minchul was completely unresponsive to her complaints and just continued reading his comic without any reaction. Eventually, he finally looked at Hanul when he felt her staring at him relentlessly. It seemed a new battle had ignited between them, the kind where you have a staring contest. He just bluntly asked what was wrong with her this time, as he had no idea why she was acting so fidgety, but she just looked hesitant. Despite trying to act cool, Minchul couldn't withstand the gaze of the girl he liked for long. The guy desperately tried to figure out why she was being like this, but his heart was beating faster. Hanul noticed he was avoiding her gaze, which immediately sparked the same thought in both of their minds. It was as if they both had an epiphany, wondering how the other felt, but neither could say it out loud. Hanul was about to ask him the burning question, but just then the sound of the buzzer filled the air. Using it as an excuse, Minchul got up to get his new order, since she had already finished the first round. She played along when he casually pointed out that she hadn't had enough of the food they ordered earlier. A minute later, another tray with just as much mouth-watering food was placed in front of her. Hanul looked at the food on the table and saw that it was all her favorite things. She couldn't help but think that it had become so normal for him to take care of her that she didn't even notice it. She had been taking Kim Minchul's kindness for granted. Even though he was always doing nice things, she knew she shouldn't rush things, as their situation was a bit complicated and she had to be careful not to scare him. Hanul realized that if their relationship changed, it could all come crashing down quickly because of his personality. With that in mind, she decided to take it slow, one step at a time, so as not to startle him. Even with all the risks, she truly hoped their relationship could slowly develop into something more than friends. After carefully thinking through her plan, she called out to Kim Minchul. He was lost in thought, and when he responded, she gave him a genuine, almost childlike smile and tugged on his sleeve. A new grand plan seemed to bloom in her mind, and she didn't hesitate to suggest they hang out again soon. The next day, she headed to the bookstore, excited to spend her first paycheck. As soon as she got paid, there were suddenly countless things to buy, but she was trying to save up. Wandering through the huge bookstore, she finally found the book she needed for school. Despite being quite tall, Hanul still had trouble reaching the book she needed. She was very surprised when a tall guy's hand easily plucked it from the high shelf, completely saving her. She slowly turned around to get a good look at her savior's face. She was even more shocked when she saw Jay, Sunbei, standing behind her, smiling like a Cheshire cat. She casually looked him over until her gaze fell on a little girl standing next to the tall guy. Jay, Mini-Me, immediately met her gaze and bluntly asked her why she was staring. Meanwhile, Minchul had just woken up in his room, even though it was already evening. He immediately froze, his mind racing as he replayed everything that had happened yesterday. He shook his head, trying to snap out of the sudden trance. It was no use. He rolled over, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. He started to wonder if she really liked him, though he could hardly believe it. His mind began to paint pictures of them together, loving each other as more than just friends. He started thinking about how he would act if she were his girlfriend, not just a friend. Man, it was like he was completely lost in a dream where everything was going his way, and he was truly happy. But sadly, the dream turned into a nightmare, and Hanul appeared, the one whose relationship he had messed up long ago. It was as if she had complete control over him, bluntly asking if he even deserved her after everything that had happened. This shadowy figure loomed over him like a ghost, a constant reminder of what he had done to her. She said he was just pretending to be caring and supportive, when all he really wanted was to lock her up and possess her. Minchul tried to argue, but she just called him a shameless bastard outright. It was as if she dragged him right back to the time he hurt her, making promises he couldn't keep. A few seconds later, Minchul woke up as if from a vivid nightmare, the one that had been haunting him for years. Meanwhile, Hanul was completely unaware of what was troubling him, as she was busy being confused by Jae-hee's little sister. As he and the child casually talked about books, the girl started looking frantically back and forth between him and the kid. Finally, he picked up the little girl and admitted that she wasn't his sister, but his older sister's daughter. Hanul couldn't help but gush with affection when little Hee-won shyly said hello. Guess Hee-won didn't feel the same way, because she immediately pulled the girl's hair. Jae-hee immediately told her she couldn't just grab a stranger's hair and lowered his head so she could pull his instead. He mentioned that his sister was usually busy, so he had been looking after Hee-won and that he could handle it. The guy smiled at his niece as she tugged on his shirt like a little boss, demanding food. Hanul, thinking ahead, politely said she had something to do and tried to slip away without even getting to say nice to meet you. The kid grabbed her by the hat. Hanul blushed completely when the little one suddenly asked her to have lunch with them. She ended up agreeing, and Jae-hee Sunbae awkwardly thanked her for it. He politely assumed she had things to do, but she told him she was just going to grab a bite anyway. Jae-hee smiled and said this meal was on him, and the girl chimed in that they should eat a lot since her uncle was paying. Hearing this, Hanul looked thoughtfully at the menu, trying to decide what to order. She loved food more than anything, which wasn't great news for Jae-hee Sunbae's wallet. She felt embarrassed for being so forward, but he just laughed sincerely, amused by how she was ready to devour so much food. He was in tears from laughing when she said she couldn't resist an offer like that. Throughout all this, little Hee-won was closely observing her uncle's behavior, which gave her a simple idea. Eventually, they finalized their order and sat at a table, waiting for the food to arrive. Hanul smiled at the girl when she suddenly spoke to her after a long silence. She could hardly believe her ears when the kid bluntly asked if she was her uncle's girlfriend. Jae-hee seemed even more amused by the situation, as if it were no big deal, and asked her what she thought about it. Hanul gently patted her head and said she was just a friend from university. The girl looked surprised and asked if you could still be friends if you weren't the same age. After hearing that it was possible, she asked Hanul how they became friends, which made her pause and think. She had completely forgotten about that, so she turned to Jae-hee for help. He reminded her that they were in the same group during that event. He laughed, saying a lot had happened since then, because it felt like a long time ago to her. The guy glanced playfully out the window, realizing it had been over half a year. That conversation brought them back to the beginning of their freshman year, when they had to meet in that classroom. Even though it was the first event, there weren't many freshmen in the room. One of the girls was already complaining about Jae-hee being late as usual when everyone noticed he was absent. Just as they started talking about him, he showed up, apologizing for being late with his signature smile. Hanul immediately noticed that unique guy, the one who always charmed everyone with his looks and charisma, despite his polished appearance. He was a slacker who lived in a state of perpetual chaos. He always had a habit of being late, but he never worried about it because he loved to sleep. Today, his chronic lateness had caught up with him again, and he woke up knowing he was screwed. He was groggy from oversleeping and completely out of it for the first few minutes. Finally, he pulled himself together and dragged himself to the bathroom to wash up and shave. The smile he usually wore on his face, the one he always used to hide his true feelings, was completely gone. He frowned at his reflection in the mirror, forcing the corners of his mouth up in an attempt to feign his past cheerfulness. After a long while, he finally arrived at the office, where everyone was already waiting for him. When everyone asked if he wore his watch just for decoration, he wearily asked for their understanding. He scanned the room, noticing a group of new students, including some fresh-faced freshmen. He introduced himself, once again showing them that dazzling smile and a polite greeting. Everyone was captivated by the friendliness of this more experienced senior, their eyes filled with unconcealable admiration. Hanul thought so too, figuring he was just too busy for them to have met before. A thought immediately flashed through her mind that he was very handsome, while at the same time hoping he wouldn't talk to her. The strict senior finally announced the task details for the upcoming student event. When everyone heard the prize money was 300,000 and won, they perked up and began brainstorming video ideas. Hanul froze, her mind a complete blank, until her classmate cautiously suggested a popular challenge. The girl immediately shot down his proposal for its lack of creativity, especially coming from a video design major who would suggest something so basic. He hung his head in dejection, and when everyone told him they needed to conceive and create something original, he had no choice but to agree. It seemed the senior's words hit him hard. He couldn't say a word and just became very dejected. Hanul mentally chided the girl for being too harsh and was about to say something, but she was immediately cut off. To everyone's surprise, Jae-hee, the senior, suddenly burst out laughing and bluntly asked their classmate when she had become so harsh. He turned to the boy, telling him not to mind her words, saying she was just venting because she got scolded by a professor. She gave him an annoyed shove, asking if he was lying, but he just smiled and pointed out that she didn't have any ideas herself. Watching them bicker, Hanul fell into deep thought until an idea suddenly popped in her head. Finally, she raised her hand and unexpectedly proposed that they film a movie parody. The girl loved her idea of spoofing a famous movie that everyone knew, but now they had to decide which movie to do. As everyone continued to shower praise on Hanul's idea, he watched the content looking Hanul intently. He immediately noticed how proud she was of herself. It was written all over her face. A calm smile spread across his face, and he couldn't help but find her interesting. The next day, they finally approved Hanul's idea and began to put into action in the studio. Upon entering the studio, the girl couldn't help but marvel at the professional camera she was about to use. She was completely caught off guard when he suddenly appeared by her side, asking if she had ever filmed with this type of camera before. When she jumped, saying he had scared her and that she had never used a camera like that. He was clearly amused by her reaction. He gave her a deep look when she gladly accepted his offer to teach her how to film. Upon hearing the call for all the freshmen, she immediately rushed onto the stage. He watched her from the side the whole time, realizing she reminded him of someone. Meanwhile, the harsh senior had already started working with Hanul. The girl was ready to do anything, following every command, from holding the reflector to moving the lights. He stood behind the camera, still trying to figure out who on earth she reminded him of, and his friend immediately noticed. The boy was caught off guard by the sudden question, but she just pointed out that he was staring at her with all his attention. Another classmate told him to focus on filming, saying that Hanul was doing a great job. He agreed with her, but still kept a close eye on the girl. The day after the shoot ended, he could finally relax, taking a leisurely stroll down the hallway. After checking the team messages about a bunch of people being late, he thought about how he had actually arrived on time. He cracked his neck, remembering he'd had a bad feeling ever since this morning's meeting was planned. Seeing no message from Hanul, he couldn't help but wonder if she would even come, considering how responsible she seemed. For some reason, he was convinced she wouldn't come today, and then he opened the door to the computer lab where they had agreed to meet. You can imagine his surprise when he found the girl already there, stuffing her face with a hamburger. For the first few seconds, he was stunned and couldn't say a word. She explained that she had just arrived and hadn't sent a message because she decided to come early. Despite all she said, all he could think was, is she really going to eat all that food in one go? It took him several seconds to finally snap out of it. He kept staring at Hanul until he suddenly realized she was exactly like a hamster that loves to stuff its cheeks. Hanul had no idea what he was thinking, so she was completely caught off guard when he suddenly burst out laughing. He tried to tell her everything was fine, but he couldn't stop laughing at the crazy metaphor. Eventually, he managed to compose himself and suggested that since the others were late, they should just start first. That first meeting had sparked something in his heart, a sudden interest in her that made him always look for her. Now, she smiled sincerely, thanking him for bringing up that fun and happy memory. When she thanked him for treating her to lunch, he smiled back, saying he was also happy to reminisce together. After a while, they parted ways, wishing each other a good night. After saying goodbye, he just silently watched her back as she walked away. Oblivious as usual, he turned to his niece with his usual smile when she suddenly called out to him. He was completely caught off guard when she blurted out and asked if he liked Hanul. He tried to act nonchalant, saying he just liked her as a person, which was normal, but that wasn't what she meant. He looked completely confused when she said that the way he looked at Hanul was exactly the same as how her mom looked at her dad. The words left him so stunned he couldn't speak for several seconds. In that crucial moment, he seemed to finally understand something important, something that would change everything for him from then on. Time kept passing, and Minchul's birthday was drawing near, heralding the start of December. The boy was back in his friend's room, lost in another train of thought he couldn't escape. He dozed off, then woke up gasping as if to shake off another nightmare. Minchul felt a headache coming on and snapped that he should have been woken up the moment he fell asleep. His friend couldn't help but tease him, asking if he moved into the dorm because he was scared of ghosts at home. When he heard his phone ring, he remembered his friend had invited them out for drinks to drown his sorrows over a breakup. He froze for a moment, trying to decide whether to accept his friend's invitation. Meanwhile, Hanul's friends were already meeting up at the coffee shop where she worked, ready for a chat. The others immediately noticed Minji's scarf, a sure sign that winter was coming. They gathered to discuss their group assignment and figure out which locations they should choose and film for the project. One of the locations was supposed to be an old house, but they were having a hard time finding a suitable one. Minji immediately suggested swapping the house for something else, but that would mean giving up the kind of atmosphere they needed. Hanul listened intently to their conversation, carefully considering all possible solutions. When she suddenly spoke up, her classmates all turned to her, saying she had an idea. Afterward, she went up to Mihi and asked if she could step out to make a short phone call, to which she said it was fine. Johan watched them with concern, sensing that the atmosphere around his old friend was a bit off. After a moment, Hanul returned and happily announced that their problem was now solved. She explained that Kim Minchul lived in that old house and had agreed to lend it to them for a day next week. Minji happily hugged her friend while she was saying that he was going out for drinks with friends, so they could even stay late. She smiled proudly as her friend started showering her and Kim Minchul with praise. But her pride didn't last long, as her coworker yelled at her, reminding her that they still had a ton of work to do. Hanul rushed to her side to apologize, as if she hadn't noticed the shift in her mood at all. The girl's emotional outburst clearly affected the customers, making everyone except Johan feel guilty. Her bad mood was related to a difficult situation she had gone through. The day before, she had met with Jae-hee thinking it was a regular date, but he suddenly told her he wanted to break up. Mihi really couldn't understand why he would do that, and she fidgeted nervously, asking him what on earth was wrong. She immediately thought she had messed something up, but he just calmly said it wasn't her problem, it was his. He struggled to find the right words, but tried to explain that he was experiencing something new and uncertain. Everything inside her froze when he suddenly said someone had caught his attention, something that had never happened before. For some reason, her intuition told her that person was Hanul, and she was absolutely right. He distractedly scratched his head, saying his mind was so full of thoughts that he couldn't focus on anything else. Mihi remained silent as he added that because they had spent so much time together, he decided to tell her this in person. The boy looked up when she suddenly asked what he planned to do about his infatuation with the other girl. She asked if he was going to ask her out, but he just said he hadn't thought that far ahead. After saying that, he suddenly looked away and out the window, as if having an epiphany. Jae-hee, who had once been completely against romantic relationships, muttered without warning that maybe it was actually quite nice. Overwhelmed by her unrequited feelings, all she could do was quietly ask why things had to turn out this way. He was caught off guard when she confronted him about when he had become the kind of man who could settle down with just one person. Her heart was filled with resentment, so she reminded him again that he always said he didn't do relationships. But Jay didn't feel guilty at all and just casually replied that, people change their minds. She couldn't believe her ears when he asked why she was so angry, acting as if they owed each other nothing. This was why she felt so betrayed and hurt, and why she had sent Hanul home. She just couldn't stand looking at her. The other girl noticed she was acting strangely, but she just coldly told her to take her friends and get lost. Although Hanul didn't really understand what was happening, she did as she was told and said goodbye. As a last-ditch effort, she told her to call if she needed anything, but that only made Mihi feel worse. She tried to distract herself from her heavy thoughts by doing her daily chores at the cafe. It was almost closing time, and as usual, she went out to take out the trash. She took a few steps toward the cafe, but the emptiness inside and the pain she felt forced her to stop. Mihi couldn't hold it in any longer and collapsed to the ground. Knowing no one could see her, she could finally let out her emotions. She cursed everyone and everything around her in her mind, truly not understanding why things always turned out this way for her. Just as she was thinking about how much she hated herself, someone gently draped their jacket over her. It was Johan, who calmly pointed out that she was crying again, all curled up in a ball. She looked up at him again with her big, teary eyes, feeling as if the whole world was against her. He couldn't help but remember the time a young Johan had found her crying in a corner yet again, calmly asking who had made her cry this time. That day, he was walking home from school as usual, not expecting any trouble. As he passed another street corner, he froze, listening to someone's sad sobs. He approached quietly, careful not to startle the crying girl, and suddenly saw Mihi. It seemed she wasn't happy to be seen by him in such a vulnerable state again. Now, years later, he had found her again, heartbroken and teary-eyed. Mihi tried to maintain her dignity, struggling to her feet and resentfully saying he had scared her. Hearing her ask why he was there, Johan replied that she looked sad and it had worried him. She looked away thoughtfully, realizing that he had appeared by her side once again at the most unexpected and difficult of times. Still not wanting to show weakness, she held out his jacket, saying she already liked someone. Mihi coldly added that he shouldn't waste his time, but he just asked if she was crying because of that person. Johan didn't want to leave her alone with her thoughts, so he said he was a good listener and that they could have a drink together. She seemed unimpressed by the offer and immediately told him to cut the crap. She turned away in annoyance, asking what made him think she would want to pour her heart out to him. Mihi held up her phone to emphasize that she had plenty of friends besides him. Despite her tough talk, she agreed to have a drink and ended up telling him everything. The more sober Johan told her to eat something, as drinking that much would be bad for her stomach. She snapped at him not to get the wrong idea, saying she was only here because all her other friends were busy. Right after, she went back to her situation, complaining about how he could just end the relationship without any warning and then forget about it. She banged her fist on the table, saying she had specifically dressed up, hoping there was a special reason he had asked her to the cafe. Mihi loudly declared that he couldn't just do things like this because he was handsome and that he had his priorities backward anyway. Johan felt confused, thinking that if she was this open about her private life, maybe she really didn't see him as a man. After a short pause, he suddenly asked her why she couldn't forget him if he was so terrible. The girl fell silent, a shadow crossing her face, and quietly said that he had been good to her, even if it didn't seem like anything special. She had always known he wasn't doing it because he loved her, but he was so caring that she couldn't help but start hoping. Mihi felt that if she had just held on to the relationship, it would have eventually developed into something deeper. She didn't mention Hanul getting between them, but still blurted out that she was jealous of her. The girl added that you didn't even have to look closely to see that everyone around them liked Hanul. She also mentioned Minchul, saying she was sure he was genuinely in love with her too. Mihi said dejectedly that it annoyed her how Hanul got everything so easily. Even though it bothered her, she still said that she was a very kind and caring person. She buried her head in her hands sadly, calling herself awful for being jealous of and hating a girl like that. After Johan called her name a few times, she jumped up and said she absolutely needed to eat something now. She laughed, saying that even though she rambled on, he had always listened to her complain and let her vent when they were kids, and added that she must feel comfortable with him now too, since she was spilling these embarrassing things so easily. As she announced it was her treat and ordered him to get whatever he wanted, Johan got lost in his own thoughts. It was then that he realized she really wasn't interested in him, as she finished another bottle of soju. After a while, she was completely drunk, slurring her words, and had started to giggle. She leaned her head against the wall and said that, honestly, she had never been anyone's first choice. The girl swayed and added that she was always second place to her family, friends, and boyfriends. Johan went over and said she was too drunk and that they should go home. He lectured her, saying she shouldn't get this drunk because she wouldn't even notice if someone suddenly kidnapped her. She poked his nose and said it was fine because he was there. She grinned smugly, confidently saying she knew he wouldn't touch her, and he agreed, saying it was pure torture. Johan sat down next to her, telling her to lean on him and stop shaking her head so hard. She just said he was a really good person, and he replied that he was only like that with her. Mihi suddenly started talking about how much she hated being controlled by loneliness, which had made her start trying to change herself. She watched tons of videos on improving self-esteem, adjusted her mental state, and buried herself in work. But even after all that, she was crying again, admitting that when she was alone at home, she felt completely unneeded. Johan listened with frustration as she talked about how hard loneliness was and how she could do nothing about it. it. She cried in anguish, wishing for someone, anyone, to be by her side, completely oblivious to her friend of many years. He stayed by her side, listening to her say that she wouldn't be so lonely if she just had one person on her side. After saying that, she fell asleep right on his shoulder, like a tired little kitten. She didn't hear him whisper that he was ready to be her friend, her boyfriend, and if she'd let him, her family. Considering his feelings had been ignored for so many years, the words sounded sad, yet were still full of tenderness. He dreamed of a time when she would see him as more than just a friend, but as a real partner, someone she could count on. They weren't the only ones who had poured their hearts out over drinks in the past few days. Minchul's friends were shocked at his current state. The guy was dead drunk, almost unconscious, and had collapsed right onto the table. Kim Minchul blinked thoughtfully, wondering what on earth had made him get so drunk tonight. Meanwhile, a full-blown movie shoot was underway at his place, all for his upcoming university assignment. After hours of hard work, Johan finally said the magic words, marking the end of our work for the day. Even though we still had a ton of editing to do, we were all excited to have finished the main part. The girl sighed and said that only cleaning was left, and then we could finally go home, but she still kept a positive attitude. You should have seen our faces when Hanul just flopped face down onto the carpet. Without saying a word, Minji explained that she had been pulling all-nighters studying for other classes before the end of the semester. Hanul was awake, realizing her body was shaking so much she probably couldn't even make it back to the dorm. She managed to sit up, muttering that she would just sleep here for the night, since Kim Minchul wouldn't be back until tomorrow. She said she would take care of the cleaning herself, and told us to return the equipment and call her in the morning so she wouldn't oversleep. On the way home, everyone casually chatted about maybe celebrating the end of the semester after Hanul's shift. Minji said that wouldn't work because they were going to that can't miss alumni event tomorrow. Her friend was surprised because it was too early for a mixer, especially before exams. Johan surprised them by saying he was also busy tomorrow because he had a date. The girl immediately concluded it was a date, saying she could always tell. As she pressed for details about tomorrow's date, Johan glanced cautiously at his friend. This made him involuntarily think back to the recent scene where Mihi, completely drunk, had just passed out in the bar while sitting next to him. When she woke up, she was shocked to find something big and warm behind her. She immediately jumped up, staring at him in disbelief when she realized she was in his arms. This seemed to fluster her greatly, her heart about to pound out of her chest, even though Johan was as calm as ever. He explained without batting an eye that she had drunk too much and passed out, and he didn't know where to take her, and seeing her shivering from the cold, he decided to warm her up. Mihi apologized and started to take off his jacket, but he told her to put it back on so she wouldn't catch a cold. She tried to act like she wasn't cold, but a sudden sneeze completely gave her away. She sniffled, and knowing it was no use arguing, let him help her put it back on. She lowered her head and said he would catch a cold because of this, but he tried to convince her he wasn't a weakling. Without hesitation, he suddenly placed his hand on her face, pointing out how warm his hands were. I think Mihi completely misunderstood that gesture, pushing his hand away and telling him not to try to be nice to her. The boy fell silent when she declared she knew this wasn't like him. She fell into thought when he suddenly asked if she really disliked how he was acting now. The girl tried to say something else, but ended up honestly admitting that she did not like it. After a moment of thought, he suddenly demanded that she repay him, since she had made him stay out in the middle of the night. A few hours later, after that precious and blissful long sleep, Hanul finally managed to wake up. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and reached for her phone, completely failing to notice Minchul standing right there. She was so shocked to see him, not expecting him back until the morning, that she was nearly scared out of her wits. Hanul immediately told him he had scared her and reminded him that he was supposed to be staying over at his friend's place tonight. She started to scold him for not letting her know in advance, until she smelled the strong scent of alcohol. Minchul was completely out of it, and she touched his face, telling him his eyes were glazed over and he wasn't in his right mind. The boy decided to challenge that statement by grabbing her tightly by the waist and burying his face in her chest. For some reason, Hanul felt unable to push him away and couldn't help but wonder just how much he had drunk tonight. She had never seen him this drunk and tried to get him to sober up, but he simply ignored her. She worriedly asked if he had forgotten about the alumni gathering and what he was going to do about his hangover. At these words, he finally opened his eyes and began to gaze at her face as if he were mesmerized. She was caught off guard when he blurted out that he liked her kindness and pressed her hand to his own face like a loyal puppy. He nuzzled her hand, rubbing his cheek against it, a mixture of embarrassment and drunkenness on his face. He held her hand gently, then suddenly looked up at her face, their eyes meeting in an instant. For a moment, that familiar thought flashed through her mind, but she decided she didn't want to take things to that level with him while he was this drunk, deciding that would only happen after they were officially together. She called his name and suggested they lie down side by side. To her surprise, Minchul shyly asked if she would be willing to sleep with him tonight. She hesitated at first, but then blurted out that she would. Minchul's gathering had started with his friend bawling his eyes out over a brutal breakup. Everyone was so stunned by his pathetic state that they couldn't say a word. They were shocked that he had finished an entire bottle of alcohol by himself in just 10 minutes. Even though girls always dumped him, this time he felt like he had lost both his girl and his best brother at the same time. It seemed Minchul wasn't too interested in the details of his love life, as he was just focused on stuffing his face. The heartbroken guy explained that they had been friends since high school and that he wished he could turn back time. The situation reminded Minchul of what was happening between him and Hanul, which made him freeze thoughtfully. The boy continued, saying they had always been friends who knew everything about each other, but the moment they became a couple, everything changed. Minchul was stunned when he added that even the way she looked at him had changed, and it really bothered him. Everyone was shocked when Minchul suddenly asked if they could ever go back to being friends. It seemed impossible. His friend said they had already gone too far to go back to how things were. Hearing this, he was instantly plunged into dark thoughts, as his biggest fear was that he and Hanul would become strangers. To be honest, this was part of the reason why Minchul got dead drunk. His friend asked if he was okay and what was making him drink so much, as if he had just been dumped. He didn't answer, looking up thoughtfully as another boy went to the store to buy hangover medicine. After his friend left, he suddenly remembered he needed to go home, as if some kind of instinct had been triggered. He rushed back, not even 5 minutes after his friend had left. The boy had drunk too much and had slept for who knows how long beside his beloved girlfriend. He got up as quietly as he could and froze, carefully studying her sleeping face. He was sure she was asleep, which prompted him to quietly confess that he couldn't bear to be separated from her. Minchul added that this was exactly why it was better not to risk it, not to start anything that could jeopardize their relationship. Despite the seriousness of his words, he couldn't help but smile when he saw the girl drooling in her sleep. After a while, Hanul opened her eyes in confusion, feeling someone touching her body. At first, she hadn't even considered that his innocent request would turn into him holding her in his sleep. She felt his arm tighten around her waist, his breath tickling her neck. Not only that, but she felt something else that made her jump in surprise and start to complain. The drunkard was clearly amused by her sudden panic and asked her what was wrong. She immediately scolded him for being too bold, but he just pulled her back and told her to calm down. But his calm attempt to soothe her brought their faces too close. Despite the intimate mood, the strong smell of alcohol completely ruined the atmosphere, and she accused him of being drunk. Caressing his cheek, he lovingly nuzzled her hand, making her heart skip a beat or two. She snatched her hand back, saying it reminded her of how docile he used to be. Just as she started talking about how cute he was as a child, a fire suddenly lit up in his eyes. He casually slid his hand onto her leggings and playfully asked her what exactly she found cute about him. He seemed to be enjoying the little game that had suddenly started between them, which annoyed Hanul even more and sparked her competitive spirit. So she blurted out that he always used to follow her around when they were kids. She played along, her hands roaming over his body, adding that he used to cry at the drop of a hat. She was about to mention how he always hid behind her, but his next move shut her up. Hanul's heart stirred at his triumphant expression, but something else stopped her from speaking. He looked so handsome in that moment that she couldn't help but let her eyes wander over him. After sizing him up, she leaned in closer, feeling his racing heartbeat. They both froze, realizing they had unintentionally crossed the line again. She looked back into his eyes as his hands continued to explore everywhere. Knowing where things were headed, she instinctively recoiled, even though it went against her initial intentions. Still, she was ready. But the only thing that made her hesitate was the lack of protection. Minchul saw right through it and suggested they do something that didn't involve the main event. A moment later, despite his promise not to do anything, he just kept kissing her all over. Unexpectedly, what flustered her the most was his hazy gaze as he did it. When she told him to stop nibbling, he surprised her by touching her again and pointing out that she was actually enjoying it. Hanul instantly blushed and tried to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. Humiliated and enraged by his words, she instinctively punched him in his most vital spot. Seeing the serious effect her actions had on him, she immediately apologized for the sudden attack. Minchul seemed to be holding back immense pain as he grabbed her ankle, telling her to be careful. Even so, he was trembling in pain and blurted out that he was carrying precious cargo down there. She rubbed him again with her foot, mentally noting that it felt softer than before and the texture had changed. As she focused on rubbing her foot between his legs, Minchul's face was practically burning with embarrassment. It wasn't until he suddenly called out to her that Hanul was forced to stop her fun activity. Although he was surprised by her series of casual touches, he somehow still felt a sense of pleasure. She froze on the spot when he asked her, with utmost seriousness, what on earth she was doing now. She had been so engrossed that she hadn't realized the situation she was in until that moment. Meanwhile, Minji was still outside and happened to see her senior. He was lying on a bench and greeted the girl with his usual smile. She was surprised that he was just casually smoking in only a shirt in the middle of December. Jay, he stood up and dusted himself off, asking her why she wasn't with Hanul as usual. Minji said that Hanul had fallen asleep after completing a difficult task. To his surprise, Minji pulled out a familiar pack of cigarettes, the brand she usually smoked behind her friend's back. She admitted to having the same bad habit as him and explained that Hanul disliked the smell of smoke. She still couldn't help but ask him why he was lying here in the middle of the night. Her question made him pensive, as he still didn't know how to sort out his thoughts. Noticing Minji had gone quiet, he suddenly asked what her friend actually liked. Minji was clearly caught off guard by the unexpected question and didn't know how to answer for a moment. Meanwhile, Hanul was having the time of her life with the friend she had dreamed of getting closer to. Minchul, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by a familiar feeling and could barely restrain himself. In this situation, if she continued to do as she pleased, he couldn't help but wonder what was going on, as he had already hinted that she should stop. However, Hanul became even bolder, as she herself was enjoying touching him like this. What attracted her the most was Kim Minchul's reaction as he desperately tried to suppress his feelings. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dominance, and this feeling also made her heart race. He suddenly went limp as she unexpectedly increased the pressure. He felt a new and complex sensation, forcing him to exercise even more restraint to avoid losing control. Minchul quickly and gently grabbed her leg to make her stop, saying that was enough. Hanul immediately grew worried, thinking she had hurt him, but he never admitted the real reason. He felt both frustrated and excited, knowing he couldn't go any further than just touching. Well aware that this couldn't continue, he wrapped the girl in a blanket, saying her curiosity would get her into trouble. He asked if she had touched enough, and she lowered her head, thinking to herself that she still wanted to touch more. He had her lie down beside him, and a half-drunk Minchul gazed thoughtfully into her eyes. Then he closed his eyes, saying his eyelids were getting heavy. He unexpectedly suggested they sleep for a while, as it was already late. She was surprised when he said it was the first time in a long while that he felt he could sleep soundly. Hanul sat up and asked the nearly asleep him if he had a sleeping disorder, to which he hummed in agreement. She was even more surprised when he mumbled in a half-asleep state that it was because she was always appearing in his dreams. For some reason, this made her laugh, and she asked him how often it happened, only to find out she was always in his dreams. Feeling a thrill of excitement, she eagerly asked if he really liked her enough to always see her in his dreams. You can imagine her surprise when he confessed without hesitation that he did, in fact, like her a lot. At first, Hanul froze, as if she couldn't believe he would actually like her and not just as a friend. She just sat there beside Minchul, too shocked to speak, as if the meaning of his words was just beginning to sink in. After a long few seconds, she finally processed what he had said and was left dumbfounded, thrilled to hear that he really liked her. She couldn't help but jump up and down next to Minchul. Hanul felt her heart pounding and blurted out, that she really liked him too. Unfortunately, the guy was dead asleep and didn't hear a single word, which made things a bit complicated. Looking at his sleeping form, she couldn't suppress her frustration and yelled at him to wake up and listen to her confession. She shook him, slapped his face, and tried everything to wake him up, but nothing worked. She was so eager to level up their relationship that she sat right on top of him and shook him, demanding that they start dating. She was ecstatic, but seeing him still sound asleep, she started to get genuinely annoyed. In the end, she kept watch by his bedside until morning, wanting to wait for him to wake up. Hanul was convinced this was the perfect opportunity for her confession, and that she absolutely couldn't miss it. Even though she hadn't been able to prepare a gift as planned, she still desperately hoped for some progress between them. But no matter how much she shook him, he was unresponsive, as if he had passed out, which scared her. She poked his face again, trying to wake him, but he still showed no reaction. The girl started to sweat, as she had to go to her part-time job soon and couldn't be late. Seeing a call from Minji, she suddenly remembered that she had asked her to call and wake her up if she overslept. Although it was an extremely difficult decision, she got dressed and left Minchul to go to work. Unfortunately, he happened to wake up right after hearing the front door slam shut. During this time, Hanul was so stressed that she couldn't stop biting her nails. Her behavior was so unusual that her colleague, Mihi, also noticed. She saw Hanul pacing back and forth anxiously, like a puppy eager to go outside. Mihi knew she had to snap her out of it, so she decided to ask a few questions. First, she asked Hanul why she had suddenly decided to come to work in the morning and if she had any plans for the evening. Hanul immediately replied with a smile, saying she was attending a class reunion today, so she needed the evening free. In addition to that, Hanul suddenly apologized for her previous behavior and rudeness, which took Mihi by surprise. Apologizing wasn't easy for Hanul, but she still asked for forgiveness for getting angry at Mihi over something trivial before. Hanul immediately remembered that Mihi had looked very sad that day and quickly asked if something was wrong. Mihi was clearly surprised that Hanul would even care about her after her previous harsh attitude. Despite that, Hanul once again gave her a bright smile, saying that everyone has tough times. Mihi was surprised that the person who had hated her over a guy not long ago could be so understanding. Even though Hanul was younger, she had enough wisdom to forgive and not hold a grudge. More importantly, Mihi was so thrilled that her colleague had finally apologized that she gave her a big hug. Hanul rambled on about how she was just like a cat, not realizing how tightly she was hugging. Mihi was extremely embarrassed and only managed to break free from her iron grip after saying she could barely breathe. Mihi tried to change the subject, asking if she was really that excited about the upcoming class reunion. Hanul was about to share her joy, telling her to come closer so she could tell her about the friend she mentioned. She whispered that it seemed like they were about to start dating, which was why she was so excited. Seeing her so happy, Mihi couldn't help but be happy for her and told her that everything would work out. After a long few hours, the long-awaited evening finally arrived, heralding the start of the grand class reunion. Hanul and Minji arrived at the venue and began to scan the familiar crowd ahead. Just as they were figuring out where to go, the former class president, Hayu Jong, greeted them with a smile. The girls were happy to see their old classmate, as they hadn't gathered in a long time due to the college entrance exams. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, they headed towards where their other old classmates were. Hanul froze when someone suddenly asked if Kim Minchul had come with her. Seeing that the message wouldn't send, Minji guessed he was probably still recovering from last night's hangover. Hanul agreed, then asked in annoyance why he always had to overdo it. She didn't expect at all to look up and see Minchul, who spoke up, saying he never thought he'd hear something like that from her. The moment he spoke, everyone's eyes turned to him in unison, as if he were some kind of celebrity. Everyone once again marveled at how handsome he was, and his new hairstyle even made him look like an idol. Meanwhile, Hayu Jong had already saved them seats, telling them not to stand in the aisle and to go take their places. The girl sitting next to Hayu Jong gave Hanul a warm smile, telling her there was an empty seat next to her. Hanul was very grateful for her kindness and thanked her, about to accept, but she ended up deciding to sit next to Minji, which placed her directly across from the female classmate with purple hair. She took another good look at her face, trying hard to figure out who this girl was, as she couldn't recall her name. The other girl seemed to notice the confusion in her eyes and smiled again, introducing herself as Yun So-hee. Hearing that, Hanul finally remembered who she was and smiled back. She tried to smooth things over, admitting she didn't recognize her because of her new hair color and makeup, but Minchul still had no impression of her. After a while, their attention was drawn to the mountain of delicious food piled on the table. Throughout the whole process, Minchul could feel everyone's eyes on him, which started to annoy him. While Minji wondered why everyone was looking at her, and Minchul grew more impatient, Hanul was solely focused on her confession. A girl broke the awkward silence, complimenting Minchul by saying she really liked his new hairstyle. The rest of the group chimed in, asking him about dyeing his hair and showering him with praise. The problem was, he didn't appreciate the flattery, so he just said a simple thank you and dodged their questions. Minchul, on the other hand, saw an opportunity to get back at Hanul, who always made fun of his hair color and called him an old man. He smiled smugly, repeating how everyone was commenting on how good his hair looked, which was the complete opposite of what Hanul thought. Normally, Hanul would have fired back with some witty retort, but this time she was speechless. He kept reminding her of how she used to compare him to an old man, and asked if she was ready to take back those words now. Although a part of her wanted to give in because of her feelings, she still refused to back down in an argument. And so he closely watched their back-and-forth interaction, which had hardly changed since high school. Just before this reunion, she had been racking her brain for ways to cause trouble between them, and now she was up to her old tricks again. After a while, Hanul stared at the menu as if searching for something that wasn't there. She told Minji she wanted something refreshing, but there was nothing like that on the menu. So she asked Hyejung if they could bring in outside food, like ice cream. After getting an affirmative answer, she turned to the others and asked if they wanted some. After getting everyone's approval, she stood up and said she would go buy various flavors for all 24 of them. Everyone was surprised that she would volunteer to go alone, as they doubted she could carry that much by herself. But Minchul stood up as quick as lightning and followed his best friend. After they left, a large group of old classmates immediately surrounded Minji, wanting to know what was really going on between those two. She held up her hands to pacify them, saying there was nothing to tell and that they had always been close. Although she also had a vague feeling that something had changed between them, she didn't think it was necessary to broadcast it. Unable to get any juicy details, they gave up, saying they were probably overthinking it since it had been so long. Yun-so, he was one of the few who never tried to pry into the two friends' private lives. After a long silence, she suddenly interjected that they hadn't always been this close. With a sly smile, she brought up the sensitive topic of when their relationship wasn't so good. In their first year of high school. Meanwhile, Minchul and Hanul had finished buying the ice cream and were about to head back. Hanul tried to convince him the bags weren't heavy, but he insisted on carrying them himself. Not only that, but he also gently tapped her forehead with a can of Pepsi before handing it to her. She blushed when he once again showed his considerate side, remembering that she didn't like those hangover drinks. Opening the can, Hanul carefully watched Minchul, wondering if she should confess right now. She tried to bring up what he had said to her in his half-asleep state yesterday, but the words just wouldn't come out. Just recalling the scene made her face turn red, and she got stuck mid-sentence. Minchul didn't quite understand what she was trying to say and just stared at her, which made her even more flustered. Just then, another girl suddenly appeared, saying she just wanted to come and check on the situation, which startled Hanul. Startled by the former classmate's sudden appearance, Hanul accidentally dropped her Pepsi on the ground. And so he turned to Hanul with a concerned look, asking if she was okay. Her hands were covered in soda, and she had to leave to wash them. After asking for the restroom's location, she told them to go back without her and that she would follow after cleaning up. Minchul, unsuspecting, made a sarcastic remark, telling her not to fall asleep in the restroom again. He chuckled to himself as he watched her run towards the restroom to wash off the soda. He was taken aback when he turned around and saw the girl staring intently at him. Now that it was just the two of them, he recoiled again as if swatting a fly when she questioned if he and Hanul were dating. He wearily ran a hand through his hair and snapped that they weren't dating, telling her to drop it. He froze when she unexpectedly said it would be really despicable if you dated Hanul. Minchul could hardly believe his ears as he finally understood the true meaning behind her words. So he watched his reaction and just smiled smugly, as if calculating what to say next. As so he told him to think about how much he had hurt her back then. Hanul was already walking into the restroom. She never imagined that this old classmate would become the crux of what could potentially ruin everything between them. Minchul thought she was being utterly shameless to say such a thing and called a load of nonsense. She sighed wearily and asked him why he was playing dumb, while he was warning her not to push her luck. To wash her hands, Hanul had to take off the wristband she had worn for years. Minchul recoiled in shock when so he suddenly brought up Hanul's left wrist, the very thing he had been worried about for so long. He froze, unable to say a word, while she continued to rub salt in his wound, making him feel like it was all his fault. For years, Hanul had a scar on her wrist, a permanent reminder of a past she'd rather not remember. She just stood there, staring at the wet wristband, not wanting to put it back on since she had accidentally gotten it wet. In the end, she stuffed it in her pocket, thinking that her long sleeves would hide the scar anyway. Meanwhile, Minchul was still standing frozen on the empty street while so he continued to press him. Since he didn't even remember her name, he tried to figure out who she was and what right she had to talk about. Those things. She just retorted sharply that he shouldn't think he and Hanul were the only ones in the world and that there were other people around. He was completely stunned when she casually mentioned that others had also seen what happened back then. At the hospital, seeing how shocked he was, she gave a malicious smile and asked if he really thought everyone would just forget and act like nothing happened. She brought up a chapter of their history that he wanted to bury and forget forever. And so he suddenly said she completely understood him because Hanul was a wonderful girl. She went on to say that being with Hanul could really make a man feel like a better person, but that Minchul didn't quite deserve her. The memories flashed back again, Hanul wailing in a hospital room as a patient. So he seemed to take pleasure in tormenting Minchul, using his own memories to viciously poke at his guilt. He gritted his teeth in anger and snapped at her to watch her mouth. But she was unfazed by his anger and didn't bite at all. She felt completely in control of the situation. She ignored his words and rambled on, saying Hanul was too good to be dragged down by his unsavory past. With that creepy smile on her face, she continued, saying Hanul would accept him completely, flaws and all. She gave a little cheer and looked at him with the same eyes, wishing him all the best in his current situation. After that, he seemed even more dejected and completely withdrew into his shell. But he immediately snapped back to reality when he heard a familiar voice. Hanul ran up to the two of them, asking why they hadn't left and were still waiting here. Completely unaware of what they had just talked about, she greeted them with her usual bright, sweet smile. But Minchul was in such a state of inner turmoil and frustration that he couldn't say a word. So he acted as if nothing had happened, saying they had decided to wait for her to come back so they could go together. Hanul was about to suggest they go back now, but she suddenly paused, remembering something important. The smile vanished from Sohee's face when she heard Hanul say they needed to talk and hoped she could give them a few minutes alone. Despite that, she couldn't refuse and just said she would go on ahead, taking the bags of ice cream with her. As soon as she was sure it was just the two of them, Hanul finally felt she could be honest about her feelings for her friend. He saw her meaningful gaze, both shy and full of affection, but his mind was elsewhere. She led him to the nearest corner to talk about what was bothering her in a more private place. After carefully checking that no one was on the street, she turned around and he spoke up, asking what she wanted to talk about. Hanul lowered her head again and hesitantly asked if he remembered what happened yesterday. It seemed Minchul had drunk so much that day that he either genuinely didn't remember what he had said or was just pretending. He tried to keep his composure, saying she had a lot of nerve to confront him for not answering his phone. He clenched his fists as hard as he could, trying to act as if everything was normal, as if nothing had changed. Seeing that he didn't remember anything, she was instantly deflated but decided to see it through anyway. Hanul held back the words she had longed to say, finding herself unable to open her mouth at that moment. Minchul watched her closely, seeing how difficult it was for her to say those few precious words. She was so nervous that not only was her voice trembling, but her legs were also shaking from shyness and anxiety. Hanul was making a huge effort, psyching herself up to finally say what was on her mind. One moment she was standing, and the next, her body started to fall as her legs gave out and the world began to spin. Luckily, Minchul caught her just in time, preventing her from hitting the ground. He wanted to scold her, but she was too busy gazing into his eyes, seeing the thousand thoughts swirling within them. Minchul pulled her closer, looking like he was about to explode, but she just kept getting lost in his beautiful eyes. Every time she got lost in them again, her love-struck heart would start pounding uncontrollably. And it wasn't just his eyes. His hand, holding her firmly by the waist, was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire. Although he probably wished he were anywhere else at that moment, he couldn't bring himself to push her away when she suddenly hugged him. He immediately questioned what she was doing, asking if she was crazy, but she was completely lost in her own world. His hand slowly slipped away as she met his gaze and blurted out that she liked him. If it weren't for his conversation with Yin, so he would have felt like he'd hit the jackpot, but at that moment, it was impossible. He had always thought he knew his place and never had any expectations, let alone anticipated her confession. He looked completely caught off guard, and all the atmosphere of a campus romance and secret crush vanished. For Hanul, Minchul recoiled from her as if from poison, and she had not expected this reaction at all. He was deeply in love with Hanul, but believed he was too messed up and unworthy of someone as wonderful and pure as her. Then, he dropped a bombshell, coldly asking what on earth she liked about him. She could hardly believe her ears when he did something even more incredible, stating bluntly that she was just confusing her feelings. Hanul immediately demanded an explanation, asking what kind of response this was after she had gathered the courage to confess. She flinched when he dropped the bomb directly. "I'm not going to date you." She grabbed his jacket, asking if he was so scared just because she decided to voice her feelings. Hanul could see that Minchul was lying to her. He was just shyly avoiding eye contact, unwilling to state the real reason. She turned back to face him and confidently declared that he liked her too, something he had said himself yesterday. Minchul had no idea what she was talking about, as he had no memory of what he had said the day before. He immediately rushed forward to cover her mouth as she shouted that people don't do those things if they don't like each other. Hanul removed his hand and stated firmly that at first, they both tried to pretend nothing was happening between them. He was stunned when she added that the fact they failed was proof in itself that their feelings were real. Minchul felt a genuine fear and couldn't answer her question about how he felt about her. Despite all of Hanul's efforts, he simply reminded her that she herself had said they were doing all this just out of simple curiosity. This left the girl so shocked that she was speechless for a moment. To make matters worse, Minchul dealt her the final blow when he suddenly turned to leave. She wanted to grab his sleeve and ask him to wait, trying to stop him, but all he wanted was to escape. She silently cursed him in her heart for leaving an unhealable scar and for acting like a coward, even though she didn't want to let him go. But in an instant, when she saw the bone-chillingly cold look in his eyes, she realized it was a complete disaster. The last straw was when he shook off her hand as she tried to hold him back, rejecting her feelings. Hanul suddenly realized she had accidentally fallen into the very situation she feared most, feeling like she might lose him. Minchul felt the same way, but he was too scared to control himself, so he left her, asking her one last time not to try and hold him back. In the end, Hanul was devastated, and the only thing she could think of was to go back. Minji immediately noticed she had returned alone, without Minchul by her side, which looked damn strange. The heartbroken girl tried to explain that he had something urgent to attend to and decided to leave early. I guess her good friend was half convinced, suspecting that things weren't that simple. She was surprised that he had left without even wearing a jacket in this weather. And to be honest, she agreed. Minji suspected that behind her usual laughter, something was eating away at her from the inside. Hanul tried to convince herself that he was just startled and that they would still have a chance to talk. Little did she know, the girl who caused their breakup was sitting right across from her, grinning like a Cheshire cat. The next day, she waited near the university, keeping an eye out for Minchul to come out after his class. The wait was agonizing for her, and she paced back and forth, waiting for a friend. When she saw him walking down the steps, she called out to him happily. Hanul rushed up to him and, just like usual, complained about him leaving without her yesterday. She tried to stop him and make him listen to her, but he walked straight past her, as cold as ice. In that moment, she felt her heart break all over again because he didn't even want to talk to her. She turned around in a daze, as if caught in some kind of nightmare. The girl knew it was futile to try and stop him, and all she could do was watch him leave. She suddenly realized they might never see each other again, something that had never crossed her mind before. She knew that sometimes people stop contacting each other after being rejected, and she had seen it happen. She couldn't believe this was happening to them, especially since she was sure he liked her too. She wanted to stop him and ask what was wrong, but she was so heartbroken she couldn't even move. Hanul knew things would never be the same again, but she was afraid things would get even worse. She felt incredibly lonely, rejected by the person she loved so deeply. To be honest, just then, Jae-hee Sunbae was saying goodbye to his classmates, getting ready to leave campus. As he was walking, he happened to notice Hanul, who was completely unaware of her own state. He waved with his usual smile, but she was so preoccupied that she didn't notice at all. He took a closer look at her face, and, for the first time, saw that Hanul's normally bright and happy eyes were filled with tears. He was taken aback and froze for a moment with his hands still raised, not daring to get any closer. He noticed she was staring intently at one spot, as if looking for someone, before sadly lowering her head. Seeing her so dejected, his heart began to race, and he wondered why he was reacting so strongly. He had once wanted to see her cry, but now he just felt his heart sink. It seemed he had a new feeling, the kind you get when someone you care about is hurting. He tried to figure out why she was crying, and when he saw Minchul in the distance, he understood in an instant. And just like that, he was caught in the middle, feeling something stirring inside him for someone who was deeply in love with another. From then on, Hanul spent a lot of time comforting herself with memories of her childhood. On a hot summer day, they were cooling off and chatting on the porch. What bothered them that day was the fact that school was about to start. Minchul was worried they might be put in different classes, but unlike him, Hanul wasn't very concerned. The girl finally looked up from her game, and, seeing her sullen friend, she realized how much it was bothering him. She playfully nudged his shoulder and told him he would make new friends. The boy grumbled back that he didn't need any new friends. Hanul playfully called him a scaredy cat, trying to cheer him up. She pulled him down to lie next to her, as if supporting him in her own way. The girl smiled and promised she would visit him every day. Minchul froze when he saw her sincere smile. Thanks to her, he finally relaxed, realizing everything would be okay. Back then, they couldn't even imagine that one day they would go their separate ways. She was still lying face down on the bed when her friend finally appeared. The girl looked at her friend calmly and asked if she was awake. She tried to lift the blanket to see Hanul's face and saw once again that Hanul had been crying all night. She had been in this state ever since that disastrous reunion. She was bad at lying and always dodged the questions. Whenever my friend tried to cheer her up, saying she would always support her, Hanul would offer a tired smile and thank her for her concern. Minji suggested they slowly head to the station, as it seemed Hanul had completely forgotten they were going home for the holidays. The girl playfully pinched her friend's cheeks to cheer her up. After a while, they finally arrived at the bus station. Minji suggested buying some burgers for breakfast, and they also talked about how Johan wasn't planning to go home. The girls stopped at the entrance and started discussing which buses they were taking. Hanul said she had specifically booked a ticket for 7 in the evening. Before saying goodbye, Minji made me promise to keep her updated on how I was doing. Then she hopped on the train and waved at me. I gave her a warm smile as she left, and then I was all alone. I sat on a bench as a strange feeling of emptiness washed over me. For months, I've been trying to pull myself together, but every day was still agonizingly painful. I replayed all the moments from the past year in my head every day. Now, those moments felt so distant, as if they had never happened to me. I remember the kisses, the ones I had dreamed of. I always thought our friendship would last forever. We were together for so long that Minchul himself had become a part of me. However, all those hopes were shattered by the cold reality. Every day, she racked her brain, trying to figure out what she had done wrong. She glanced at the screen and saw she still had to wait a damn 2 hours. She couldn't help but think about how she should act when she got home. Hanul was worried Minchul would ignore her again. Whenever she thought about it, she felt an indescribable sense of frustration. She paced around the station, her mind filled with countless questions. Hanul didn't know what to say if someone asked, and she had no idea how to answer the Andes who might interrogate her about their relationship. Besides, she knew her brothers were coming back for the new year. Hanul kept a calm facade, but all of this was really upsetting her. She wandered around the station until she finally remembered to check the time. She was surprised to find the station was almost empty. The girl pulled her phone out of her pocket and realized she had been wandering until late. She had been so lost in thought that she had completely forgotten the time. She leaned against the wall, completely zoned out, and cursed herself for being a fool. Hanul couldn't even figure out how she had wasted 5 hours. She felt a strange pain in her stomach and headed to the restroom. The girl thought she had eaten too much as she looked at herself in the mirror. She remembered the time she saw Minchul off at the train station, and he was scolding her again for missing the last train. Her tardiness drove him crazy, but he put up with it. Every time they went out, he would tell her not to eat too much. They argued about it every time, but he was always by her side. Sometimes his advice annoyed her, even when he was right. Their relationship had been more or less like that for years. Hanul kept staring at the mirror, trying to figure out what was wrong with her. She cursed him one more time and then rushed out of the station. She was about to walk right past, but then she heard a familiar voice. She happened to see a young couple making out intensely. Hanul froze on the spot, realizing she had just seen her co-worker. The girl was red-faced from being caught. I guess even Hanul didn't expect to run into her here. She didn't even know why she started crying at the sight. In the end, she explained her situation and got help. Hanul came out of the bathroom and thanked Sihi for taking her in. Sihi was understanding, as her co-worker had nowhere else to go. When Sihi decided to ask her why she was crying, Hanul froze. She didn't want to say it first, but she alluded to the intimate scene in the alley. I guess they were both super embarrassed about the whole thing, so Sihi decided to cut the conversation short, saying she was going to go wash up. Hanul decided to tidy up the room while thinking about the real reason she had cried. The truth was, she had been craving a simple hug and some affection for a while. Just then, the girl picked up her friend's bag, looking for a blanket. She thought it would be under the bed, but things were not as they seemed. Sihi poked her head out of the bathroom to ask for a towel, definitely not expecting her friend to discover her little secret. Sihi snatched her treasure from her hands and yelled out of embarrassment. She immediately told Hanul not to pretend she didn't know anything. The girl awkwardly admitted that she had never really been interested in that kind of thing before. She kept making excuses until she remembered something that happened a long time ago. After all this time, Hanul had completely forgotten how Minchul had found her. That one time, that day, he had walked into her room without knocking as usual, and he found his friend trying to cover herself with a pillow. It was beyond awkward. Before that, Hanul had just finished her last exam and had collapsed on her bed in relief. She was so excited to finally have some freedom in her life. Hanul already knew she had gotten into university, so she could finally relax. After the initial excitement wore off, she started thinking about what to do next. She immediately started imagining what her university life would be like. Hanul grinned, hugging her pillow tightly, and began to fantasize about all her future plans. She remembered the advice her brothers had once given her about going to university, where they shared the usual wisdom about knowing your limits at parties. The young men had been going on about knowing your limits. Hanul turned around when her brother reminded her to be careful of people. He told her to be wary of those who were especially nice to her for no reason. Her brother solemnly insisted that she be careful with men. Hanul smiled calmly and promised to listen to them. Her second oldest brother laughed, saying she was still interested in men anyway. The girl laughed and said she wanted to know what it was like to date a guy. They were stunned by her sudden, innocent remark. Her brothers knew it was normal for her age, but they were still completely at a loss. Just remembering that conversation at school made her start thinking about men. She hugged her pillow tightly, thinking how cool it would be if she could actually date someone. It was the first time she was genuinely curious about what people do when they're in a relationship. Hanul started making a mental list of all the aspects of a relationship she could imagine. Somehow, she remembered a video she had seen at school. She shyly lay on her back, realizing that the video had indeed had an effect on her. She started to wonder if that was something people did when they were dating. Hanul held her breath as if she were exploring something completely new. She stared thoughtfully at her own hips, surprised by her own thoughts. The girl stared thoughtfully at the part that had appeared in the video, and she gripped the pillow tightly, wondering if it would hurt. After thinking for a moment, Hanul blushed and moved her hand away. She paused, then curiously fumbled around, trying to find the right spot. She was curious about what all this could lead to. Her face grew redder as she felt new, strange sensations. She was just about to succeed, but Minchul interrupted her private moment. Her jaw dropped in surprise and embarrassment when he burst in. He didn't seem to realize what was happening right away, as he was looking at his phone. Before he could even look up, a pillow came flying at his head. Hanul pounced on him and told him to knock next time before barging in. She kept yelling at him, trying to figure out if he had seen anything he shouldn't have. Minchul suddenly picked her up and decided to carry her to the kitchen. She tried to break free, but he held her tightly by the waist like a loaf of bread. All these memories flashed through her mind when she saw Sihe's partner. The girl picked up her things, thinking to herself that she had a bit of a story after all. In the end, they decided to call it a day and go to bed. The next morning, Sihe was woken up for the first time by a clamor. She came out of her room and saw Hanul washing the dishes. She apologized for the noise and told Sihe to go back to sleep. The girl let out a big yawn and noticed the mountain of dishes piled up in the sink. She looked around and saw that the entire apartment was spotless. Hanul had asked if she could help by vacuuming up all the hair in the house. Sihe, of course, wasn't going to pass up the opportunity and was happy to take any help she could get. As a result, Hanul had magically transformed the whole damn house. Sihe happily pointed out how good she was at housework. Her friend replied wearily that cooking was definitely not her strong suit. She accidentally let it slip that because of this, he was always the one in charge of cooking. Hanul didn't even realize she had brought up Minchul again. He knew Hanul wasn't good at cooking, so he always took care of it. The girl didn't know he was doing the same thing again. Minchul was trying to distract himself by making breakfast. He didn't even realize his thoughts had drifted back to that day. It seems he still couldn't get over her, or what had happened. He even started blaming himself for ignoring her back then. Minchul cursed himself out loud for being a complete idiot, so much so that he didn't hear the door. He had completely forgotten that someone could show up at any time. Just then, the eldest son of the Kim family, Kim Ho-jun, was on his way back. The guy said he made the right choice, coming to Minchul's place instead of going home. He was stunned to see a full 9-course meal on the table. He knew with just one look that Minchul and Hanul had fought. He immediately told him that all he needed to do was go and give a sincere apology. He was completely sure his little brother was facing a difficult problem. Kim Ho-jun thought he should just apologize directly instead of agonizing over it. He insisted that they needed to solve the problem, not run away from it. Despite his attempts to give advice, Minchul kept avoiding the conversation. He looked distracted and dejected, as if he wasn't listening at all. All the eldest brother could do was frown and glare at him. Meanwhile, the person who caused all this was living her own sweet life. She dreamily organized her stationery, cutting out various shapes. The girl gazed thoughtfully at the handmade card. On it was a photo from their last high school reunion. Just seeing Hanul smile instantly brightened her mood. She was genuinely happy that she had the courage to do it back then. She had dreamed of taking a picture with her crush. She was so obsessed with Hanul that she even scribbled out Minji's face. She hugged the card excitedly, wondering when they would meet again. The next morning, Minchul's brother said it was time to go to their parents' house. Minchul didn't understand the rush, as New Year's wasn't here yet. The guy asked in surprise if he really didn't want to go. He reminded him that Minchul hadn't shown his face in a year and needed to visit. His brother tried to probe for the reason behind his strange behavior. He eventually gave in and agreed to go to the gathering. Their brother got up to let them in, unaware of how much Minchul was struggling. The second son of the Kim family, Jun-min, waved happily at them. He gave them a warm hug, saying they had grown up a lot. Jun-min was clearly surprised when he realized they hadn't come with Hanul. The eldest brother told them to stop making a fuss, saying she would come with her mom. Before they could react, Hanul's mom was standing behind them. Jun-min rushed over to give his awesome and a big hug. After the greetings, the main thing they wanted to know was where Hanul was. She had lied directly to her mom, saying she had plans with a friend and couldn't make it. Minchul tensed up. He felt that something was off about that excuse. Just then, their super loud mom appeared. She scolded her sons for not letting Andy Yunshin rest. She told them to stop blocking the doorway and go help in the kitchen. One of the brothers went up to Annie Yunshin and asked if Hanul would be coming tomorrow. He hadn't spoken to her in almost a year and really wanted to see her. The other brother told him to stop asking and not to push it. Minchul seemed out of place and unusually quiet. He froze. He was completely stunned when they decided to call and ask Hanul. They thought she would be happy to hear that Jun-min was in town too. Annie Yunshin was all for it and immediately started calling her daughter. The moment she picked up, they started laughing like crazy and began asking how she was and what she was eating. She knew they could hear her eating chips and looked away worriedly. The girl started to get nervous when she realized why they were calling. When her suspicions were confirmed, she frowned, very annoyed. Hanul tried to explain, but then she heard Junmin's voice. The girl was clearly surprised when she realized he was there too. She was happy to hear how much everyone missed her. The smile vanished from her face when she heard Minchul was there too. Hanul felt a strange pressure, knowing how many people she had misled. She gathered her courage and told her mom she wasn't coming. When she said she had confessed to him and been rejected, Minchul froze in the doorway. He knew he was done for once everyone figure out the truth. Minchul tried to run, but his brothers immediately tackled him to the ground. They decided to go to a bowling alley to continue their talk. A customer ran to her friend to gossip about what she had just seen. She told us in great surprise that she saw 3 men at a table. When they realized the guys were handsome, they decided to get a closer look. The girls nearly screamed when they saw the 3 handsome guys. They were practically drooling until they saw one of them lying on the floor. They noticed he was lying face down on the lane, trembling like a leaf. Meanwhile, his companions kept getting strikes. Minchul's brother smirked as he watched the ball's trajectory. He stepped back and told Minchul to hurry up and get off the floor. The guy somehow got to his feet and got a strike with 1 ball. He did it so casually that everyone's jaw dropped. His brother asked irritably if his legs were hurting like hell. Minchul said, "How can we get worse every time we play?" The eldest brother just sized him up without a word, as if deep in thought. After a moment, he decided to confront his little brother. He said he was as stiff as a board and needed to practice alone. He said if he could actually win a game, he'd go buy him something from the snack bar. And just like that, he managed to get Minchul alone. He wanted to know right away what kind of trouble his brother had gotten into this time. He looked at Minchul and demanded he explain what on earth had happened. When they asked if he liked Hanul, the guy looked away thoughtfully. Kim Ho-jun didn't wait for an answer and just said it. She definitely likes him. Seeing Minchul's surprised expression, he said, "Isn't it obvious?" Ho-jun compared him to a dog that goes crazy when it leaves its owner. He knew right away that Minchul had gone silent again, avoiding the conversation. The eldest brother said that if he kept running away, nothing would change. Minchul didn't want to talk about it and just kept his mouth shut. Right then, 2 girls came over and asked for their numbers. The other brother said, "Go away, no chance." He pointed at Minchul and said he already had a girlfriend. The guy decided to joke around, calling his older brother a burden. Ho-jun decided to play along and said with a straight face, "He's divorced." The moment he said it, the girls immediately regretted even trying. They realized they didn't stand a chance and quickly scurried away. They were very frustrated because they had rarely met men that handsome. One of the girls pointed at Minchul and said she would forget her ex. Just looking at his face, she started bad-mouthing her ex, wondering what she ever saw in that jerk. Hearing this, Minchul unexpectedly said that sometimes it's better to keep things as they are. He said he was fine on his own and that those kinds of relationships always fall apart anyway. His older brother was about to argue back, but he let it go. He said he just rejected her. It's not like they broke up. Ho-jun told him not to act like it was the end of the world. The moment he saw his brother's face, it all clicked. He immediately grabbed a ball, wanted to beat the crap out of Minchul. Meanwhile, he had already said goodbye to Hanul and was relaxing in her room. She looked up from her food when she saw a text from her friend. The girl blushed when he said he missed her and asked her out. She couldn't help but wonder if he ever thought before he spoke. Meanwhile, the 3 miserable brothers started discussing the main topic. The eldest brother was still shocked by what Minchul had done. He knew with just one look what had happened between them. He held back the anger that had been building up since morning. Ho-jun told him not to worry about things that hadn't happened yet and not to jump to conclusions. He hoped his brother would learn to be honest. The guy knew full well he might regret it later. Minchul frowned, looking angry, but said nothing. Meanwhile, his rival in love was going through the same mental struggle, trying to figure things out. Even he didn't understand why it was bothering him so much. Weeks had passed, but her tears still lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, crying softly. That expression he had never seen on her before was really getting to him. He thoughtfully picked up his phone and stared at her profile picture. The guy studied her smiling face as if in a dream. One time, they were just hanging out at school, talking about everyday things. Hanul was fantasizing about dyeing her hair after getting into university. Minchul immediately chimed in, asking what color she wanted. He was completely caught off guard when she said she wanted platinum blonde. Even she didn't know why that color. She just thought it would look cool. Minchul wasn't thrilled with the idea, but it did get him thinking. thinking. A little while later, he showed up at her house with a whole new look. It turned out he had gone and dyed his hair platinum blonde. It seems he was expecting his girl to be a little more impressed. Before they could even have dinner, Hanul wouldn't miss any chance to tease him. Minchul thoughtfully ran a hand through his hair, wondering if the hairstyle suited him. The next day, Hanul, on a whim, decided to get her ears pierced. She had only intended to get her ears pierced, but was terribly nervous. Minchul pointed out that she had been trembling in fear for a full 20 minutes, and he asked impatiently, "Why on earth do you have to get this done?" He told her to just close her eyes and go for it. Hanul looked at him with pleading eyes, asking him to go first. Minchul was stunned, not expecting her to try and drag him down with her. When she saw he was getting angry, she started to beg him. She insisted that he go first to see if it hurt before saying anything else. The piercers started to rush her, telling her to make a decision quickly. Hanul started crying and whining even more, leaving Minchul with no choice. He was furious and almost at the end of his rope. They finally left the shop with their new piercings. Seeing Hanul's happy face, he asked if she was satisfied now. He gazed thoughtfully at her bright smile. They continued walking, and then Hanul spotted a cafe nearby. She excitedly said she wanted to work in a cafe in the future too. Just as Minchul joked that she would poison the customers, she said she could be in charge of washing dishes then. When she said he could be in charge of cooking, he gave her a curious look. He just casually turned his head away, not taking her idea seriously. As it turned out, Hanul did end up working at that cafe. She started to recall the days when she was just starting out. Meanwhile, her colleague started to hang out more often with his friend. He considerately touched her hand and asked about her plans for the weekend. She answered, a bit flustered, that she was planning to go home. Noticing that he kept touching her hand, she pushed him away. You can't imagine how surprised she was when he jokingly showed an excessive interest in her fingers. The girl recoiled in shock, and her face turned bright red. Afterward, she walked straight away and refused to take his order. As soon as she got back behind the counter, she saw Hanul's surprised expression. The girl smiled in a friendly way, trying to find something to say. She thought that they had grown quite close during this time. Hanul whispered and asked her if she was really dating that guy. He pointed at the guy and said there was no way she would date a punk like that. He then brazenly pointed out that her face seemed to turn red often, because of a certain punk. After that, the girl grabbed him by the ear and dragged him outside to talk. Hanul thought to herself, how long has it been since I've seen Minchul? She turned her head and saw a call from Jae Sunbi. Meanwhile, her colleague had already started to discipline her friend. She pinned her friend against the wall, telling him to cut it out. He looked at her face and realized she was like an angry, puffed-up cat. He had no choice but to get closer to her, begging her not to push him away. He buried his face in the crook of her neck and asked her to seriously consider him. He fell silent, feeling the streetlight outline their silhouettes. He turned his head and looked straight into her eyes. He pulled her closer and asked if she had felt uncomfortable that night. He was referring to the night at the station when he had first crossed the line a bit. The blush that spread to her neck completely gave her away, and she was flustered. Her childhood friend leaned in, forehead against forehead, and told her to close her eyes. That night, she had no idea how a simple meeting with a friend would end. Sai was agonizing over what to wear, feeling frustrated. Even she didn't understand why she was spending so much time on it. For a moment, she was annoyed with herself for getting ready so carefully, as if she were going on a date. She was so focused on picking the perfect outfit that she completely missed his suggestive text message. Finally, all dressed up, she showed up at the meeting spot. When she realized he was late for their first date, she felt a surge of irritation. To pass the time, Sai stared at her reflection. She was lost in thought, as if trying to convince herself that she hadn't really dressed up for him. She didn't notice him until he shoved a bag in front of her. As soon as she saw him, she bombarded him with questions. He said he had arrived a little early and then handed her the bag. He told her he had stayed behind to buy her favorite cookies. Although she was still angry, she was also a little touched that he remembered what she liked. He noticed that with every cookie she ate, her expression softened a bit. Chewing on the delicious cookies, she asked him what they were going to do next. After thinking for a moment, he dragged her to a jjimjilbang. She couldn't help but remember his text about cashing in his reward. Well, although she was surprised, she had to admit the jjimjilbang had its perks. She sat down next to him and saw that he was reading a book. He mentioned the name of the comic and pointed to the large shelf of comic books. When When he found out she hadn't read it, he was completely shocked. He decided he had to educate her properly. She wasn't very interested in his hobby, but decided to give it a try anyway. She had expected him to make a move, but instead he brought her to a jjimjilbang. She couldn't figure out what was going on in this guy's head at all. Sai remembered his feelings for her, but found that he was treating her just like one of the guys. She couldn't help but wonder if he really liked her at all. He noticed something was off with her and decided to get her some snacks. The girl dove into the comics, while he kept feeding her snacks. Seeing her start to take an interest in his hobby, he seemed very happy. He looked at her and thought she was really cute. He wanted to pinch her cheeks, but knew he shouldn't. After a while, he decided to go out and get more snacks. He realized they had stayed at the jjimjilbang until very late. He turned his head and found that she had fallen fast asleep. He gently touched her cheek, trying to wake her up. That gentle touch was enough to wake her. Afterward, they packed their things and left the jjimjilbang, where they had spent the whole day. As they walked towards the exit, he teased her a little for sleeping so soundly. Sai turned around and asked him how he felt since he didn't get his reward. She clearly had no idea what he was really thinking. He explained that the reward he mentioned wasn't this meeting. Sai pointed at him in surprise and asked if he was serious. She immediately pressed him, asking what reward he was talking about. He took a step closer, trapping her against the wall. She stared into his eyes in surprise, as if expecting something. He asked if he could touch her face as his reward. Without waiting for her to agree, he took the chance to pull her closer. She was caught off guard by his bold move and froze completely. He smirked and said he could finally get a good look at her face. His intense gaze made her instinctively turn her face away. She felt extremely awkward and ended up gripping his jacket tighter. He reached out to her, saying she really hadn't changed at all since they were kids. He traced her face with his finger, pointing out every detail. He gazed gently at her features, as if admiring a work of art. She was surprised when he mentioned that she still had long eyelashes. He started to recall every time she came to him when they were children, how he would always watch the tears roll down her eyelashes. Afterward, he admitted that it felt strange looking at her like this. So I was just about to figure out what he meant, but he calmly cut her off. He placed her hand on his own face and asked her if he had changed a lot. He gently pressed his cheek against hers, as if wanting to remember this moment. It felt unfamiliar to be treated so gently by someone. For some reason, she didn't want to pull her hand back. She watched thoughtfully as he enjoyed her touch. She caressed his cheek in return, realizing that everything about him felt the same as before. Despite that, she could clearly feel that he was no longer the person he used to be. She still couldn't figure out what was making her so uneasy. The moment he told her to close her eyes, her racing thoughts stopped. I guess she started to understand his intentions when she saw him leaning in. She thought he was going to kiss her and was ready for it. Imagine her surprise when he suddenly stopped and asked what she was thinking. He playfully pinched her cheek, saying that's something you do when you're actually dating. Then he smirked mischievously and called her a pervert. As soon as he said that, her face turned bright red with anger. She started yelling at him, but he pulled her close once again. Before she knew it, Sai was in his arms. She asked him why he was acting so calm when his heart was beating like crazy. He answered coolly that he was just standing next to the person he likes. Sai blushed and thought that was so like him. After a short pause, he confessed that he really loved her. He said he was all grown up now and no longer needed her protection. He clasped his hands together and asked her to look at him seriously. Sai heard footsteps nearby and immediately got nervous. At that moment, she was in the exact same position, pressed against his body in the dark. She still couldn't accept these feelings and told him to step back. The girl shut herself off and left without giving him an answer. He watched her leave thoughtfully, as if still holding on to a sliver of hope. Sai was afraid of getting this close, because with every step closer, she grew more confused. She felt he was too good for her and that she didn't deserve him. After that, she returned to the coffee shop, her mind filled with her own fears. Hanul turned around and saw that she had finally arrived. Sai tried to change the subject, steering the conversation elsewhere. She was surprised when Hanul said that Jae Sunbi had called. Hanul tried calling back, but he didn't pick up. After a short silence, Sai suggested they close up for the night. The girl started to get ready to close, tidying up the mess in the shop. Sai blurted out how much she hated herself for still reacting just from hearing his name. Hanul was suddenly reminded of her own past crush on Jae Sunbi. She couldn't help but think that feelings really do come and go as they please. Hanul wondered if her feelings for Minchul would also change. She gripped the towel tightly, hating herself for even having such a thought. She couldn't believe that they might drift apart. Sai asked if anyone could cover for her tomorrow, since the morning shift colleague had called in sick. Hanul opened her calendar, thinking she had no plans for the next day. The next second, her eyes widened as if it were the end of the world. She froze completely in shock. When she saw her colleague drop to her knees, Sai grew even more worried. She frantically asked if she could leave early for the day. Sai agreed to cover her shift the next day, so she bolted out of the cafe like lightning. The girl managed to rush to a 24-hour convenience store and grabbed a few chocolate cupcakes. Seeing that there were only a few minutes left until the next day, she stuck a candle in one of them. Hanul said sadly that her first birthday as an adult was almost here. This was the first one she would spend without Minchul. She didn't know that at that very moment, he was also sitting alone, having lit a candle. His chest ached as he recalled the times they celebrated their birthdays together. He stared thoughtfully at the flame, remembering last year's celebration. That night, they had bought the same pastries and candles. As always, they blew out the candles with big smiles and wished each other a happy birthday. The two were very close and celebrated together like this every year. That night, Hanul had wished for their next birthday to be a little more special. He just sighed and said there was nothing special about it. Over the years, Hanul had gotten used to his less than sunny disposition. She squinted at him playfully and said it was officially midnight. Minchul looked back at her and told her to just say what she wanted. He had no idea that she would soon want to be with him in that way.